Welcome to the Attic Manadad here. It's the channel where we explore what's fun in Magic, mostly on Arena, but today, not just on Arena, on Magic the Gathering Online and in paper. It's Aetherdrift. That's right. Magic is off to the races with the new set Aetherdrift. This is a very popular format of video on my channel, or it was a few years back. This is where I break down the whole set in terms of limited. It takes a crap ton of time. I haven't had time the last many sets to do it because I have small children, but we're going to try something new here. We're going to try to break this into smaller videos and release each of those videos, and then eventually do a big video that contains all of this information. So what is all the information? Let's go through it real quick. Release dates, we're going to talk about when this set comes out. Money cards, just if you just want to know what are the big cards of the set, money cards. Mana bases and fixing, we'll break down how to build the mana bases for the deck. That kind of just gives you an overview of what the mana base and fixing the lands and the fixing is for Aetherdrift. Then we'll get into the official archetypes. That is each of the 2 color pairs, the 10 2-color pairs, and what Wizards is telling you they should be. And we'll also talk about what maybe they actually should be that Wizards is not telling you. We'll also talk about some hidden archetypes, like can you make a mill deck with the set and things like that. That's not part of the official archetypes. Some build-around cards that might be fun to build around if you happen to draft them. We'll do a separate video for removal by color. This is just breaking down all the removal in the set, and we'll also talk about, like, you know, if you have a card that deals 3 damage, like Lightning Strike, which is in this set, how many creatures, what percentage of the creatures in the set is that actually going to remove? And also, what percentage of vehicles in the set is that, in this case, in this set, is a 3 damage spell going to remove? Things like that. We'll talk about that in removal, break it down by color, combat tricks by color. You know, if your opponent is playing green and white, and they are holding up some mana, what might they have in their hand? We'll talk about that. We'll do another video for top commons. I've done this before. I've been pretty successful predicting what commons are going to perform well in a set. After I read through the whole set and break everything down, I kind of make my best guess of what the top commons are going to be in each color. And I've, as I said, been pretty successful in that in the past. We'll see if it holds up here. Come back in a few months and either mock me mercilessly or give me a pat on the back for my predictions. We'll also talk about cards you should definitely not pick, not draft if you're trying to win. Cards that look good, but they aren't. They're traps. Cards that are constructed plants. They're just for standard, or they're just for, you know, Commander, and any other constructed set. And we'll also talk about cards that you have to draft, basically, if you get past them. The Windmill Slams, the cards where you don't even need to look at the rest of the pack to know that that is your pick one right out of the gate. Release dates for this set. In paper, February 7th. Get ready. You can start playing this. I think usually they do an evening, Friday evening kind of pre-release draft. This is paper first, so if you want to play these cards, the best way to play them as soon as everyone else is to go to a pre-release at your local game store and play it that way. I think they do also do online pre-releases, maybe still. I don't know. Look into that if you don't have a local game store near you, but you want to try to order up a deck and play against people on webcam. That can be a lot of fun. I've done it. Arena and MTGO does not come out till February 11th. And I believe that will be at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that is usually when it comes out for a new set. And usually the first couple hours, things are broken. So just keep that in mind if you're itching to play right off the bat. Official paper release, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Bring your date to your local game store and buy them a pack of cards for Aetherdrift. What is in the play booster? We won't talk about collector boosters because this is just for limited, so draft and sealed. This will be pretty familiar. The last couple sets that we've had play boosters, it's 14 cards instead of 15 in terms of playable cards, and then you get the non-foil token or art card as your 15th card in the pack. 1 land card, a land slot, and stick around to find out what the common lands are. We have a whole cycle of common lands. There's some rare lands. Could be pretty good. One traditional foil card of any rarity. So these play boosters, if you've been out, you can get multiple rares in a pack. This is one slot where you can get a rare. It's your foil slot. There, of course, is the rare slot, which is where you're going to get a rare no matter what. Then there is a wild card slot, one card of any rarity. So can be a rare, can be a booster fun card, which is like a cool treatment, and you'll see some examples of that coming up. 3 uncommons per pack, and then 6 to 7 commons per pack. Almost always 7 commons, but 1.5% of the time you have the chance to get a special guest, as you have in the previous several sets. And special guests in this set can include Chrome Mox, I believe, is the big pull for that. So keep an eye out for a Chrome Mox there. As we wrap up this portion of the video, let's talk about money cards. So they make it so hard to understand where you can find things. The big money cards from this set seem to be these anime style with this weird foil treatment, and Loot the Pathfinder is the tops among them. I believe those are only available in collector boosters, so you don't need to worry about seeing those in draft. Similarly, these yellow cards, the first place finisher cards, I think they're called, like you see here with March of the World Ooze, I believe those are only available in box toppers, maybe also collector boosters. I don't know. I read the whole breakdown, and I'm still confused, and I'm a very invested player, so good luck. If you really want to find out, go find out. To keep in mind, if you're opening packs, if you see a Radiant Lotus, this is the chase card in terms of the non-special cards from the set. Very demanded in Commander. I don't believe it's going to be that great in Limited. We'll have to see. Maybe there is some limited archetype that's going to need you to sacrifice a bunch of artifacts to make a bunch of mana, but I think this is really just a commander card. But if you don't want to pass money, don't pass this card, and you'll lose your pick on that, but you'll have a card that's worth probably $30 or more. And then Ether Spark is a card that is getting compared to the One Ring. I think that's a bit overblown, but it is a 4-mana artifact that can go in a lot of decks. Does it go in every deck? Certainly not in Constructed. Probably does in Limited, so it's probably just an easy Windmill Slam if you get an Ether Spark in your packs. But that is the money cards. And now let's go on and let's break down the mana bases and the archetypes for Aetherdrift. Okay, let's talk about mana bases, aka are we going to be casting our Gearhulks on curve? That's right, Aetherdrift has a cycle of 5 mythic level Gearhulks that have CCDD type mana, 2 different double pips of mana in the mana base. I've been curious about this. I found a Reddit thread where people are going into all the math of this, and I feel like this comment actually breaks it down the best. But we'll talk more about what mana is available. Just so you know, they're talking about there are gain lands, so they're common, comes into play, tap, provides 2 mana, gains you 1 life, those kind of lands available in this set. So if you want to be able to cast your Gearhulk Dino using the Salubrious Snail mana base tool, by the way, if you want to look it up and do it yourself, trying to wonder, okay, can you, how far off curve would you be if you don't play any double source producing lands? And then there are also Verges in this set too. We'll show those in a minute. But gain lands, you've got double sources. We're only talking about your double sources. I'm gonna talk about in this video, in this portion of the video, depending on what you're watching, other ways to fix your mana in this set. But just assuming gain lands only, because you're building a mana base, you drafted, let's say, 2 gain lands, you've got your Bright Glass Gearhulk. What is the chance you're going to cast it off curve? Probably going to cast it on turn 5 with 2 gain lands, 1.080 turns off curve. If it was a 5 mana Gearhulk, also about 1. Once you get up to a 6 mana Gearhulk, you're probably going to be 1.5 turns off curve. So the sweet spot really is having 3 gain lands. If you know you've taken that Gearhulk, pick one, pack one, snack those gain lands as much as you can, because then you're going to have a much better chance of casting it on curve. And of course, if your opponent drafted it, they're going to be playing a deck with no fixing, and they're going to cast it on curve against you every time, because that is how the laws of Magic work. So anyways, you can freeze the video if you need to, take a look at this, study this, but the idea is basically your typical 17 land 9/8, and I know that most people think Modern Limited is actually really a 16 land format, but let's just say you've got a Gearhulk, you're going because you got the Gearhulk, you're going with the traditional 17 lands. You do a 9/8 split, and you put as many gain lands as you can get, as many double mana producing sources as you can get. I don't think you're going to be that far off curve from casting them, and they are pretty powerful, so it's probably worth it if you can do it, but I would warp my mana base and my deck construction around it if I got a Gearhulk either in my sealed pool or in my draft and I wanted to play it. So Gearhulks in the set, that's my spiel about it. Keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about what the mana bases are in this set. Okay, so let's take a look. Here's the lands. As I mentioned, we've got Verge lands, and these are the enemy colors, so I guess these are not going to help you cast your Gearhulks. There's the 5 of them that we've been missing: black, white, green, black, white, red. It's actually, you could have multiples, right? Because you could have the opposite. You could have it adds blue, and then you only get red if you have an island or a mountain. So there are possibly more Verge lands that they could print. But anyways, these are the 5 that are in the set. Then you also have lands that enter tapped unless you control a mount or a vehicle. And mounts and vehicles, as we'll see in the archetypes section, those are concentrated in the Naya colors. So white, red, and green. Of course, all the colors have them, but the white, red, and green ones of these are probably going to be more valuable, and these lands can turn into a pilot. So this is just a little bit of help in case you drafted way too many vehicles more than mounts, because mounts are still creatures and you can still do stuff with them even if they're not saddled. But if you do that, and you can make pilot tokens if you flood out. So that is those lands. So keep those in mind, single source lands. Then, of course, all the gain lands, as we mentioned, they have custom art for the set. Pretty standard for a draft environment to have your basic, not your basic lands, but your common land slot filled with this type of land. Those are going to be key for casting Gearhulks. And then there's some other stuff we'll talk about in the archetypes. There's a couple other mythics that have 3 colors. We also have colorless lands here. There's kind of a cycle based on rarity here. There's the rare one, Muruganda Raceway. They all have start your engines, which is the speed mechanic. So they all tap to add colorless. Muruganda Raceway, once you get up to max speed, speed 4, you tap to add colorless. So it turns into a Soul Ring or Ancient Tomb without the damage, however you want to say it. So that's interesting. Amonkhet Raceway taps to give a creature haste until end of turn. I do believe there are some monocolor decks. So if you do end up getting into a monocolor deck in this format, these lands will be something to take a look at. There's a pretty big drawback to the colorless lands if you're trying to play Gearhulks, so maybe don't run them if you're running Gearhulks. In between, that's going to be more of a discussion, I think. The common version of this, max speed, 3-tap, discard a card, draw a card. There is, in blue and red, there are some bonuses for drawing and discarding. So that's something to keep in mind, especially for those decks. Again, I don't know. We'll just have to see how the format plays out, whether the speed lands are going to be that great. If you are a deck that wants to get to max speed as fast as possible, having start your engines on a land, so just being able to hit it with the land drop right away is pretty good. So that's another consideration to keep in mind with, especially, I guess, Avishkar Raceway and Amonkhet Raceway. Amonkhet Raceway maybe more so because of the haste, and if you're probably playing a fast deck. Avishkar Raceway maybe more if you're in a faster version of the blue-red deck. Be interesting. So, okay. But if you do go the Gearhulk route or the greedy 5-color greed pile route, which we'll talk about in the archetype section, you have a number of ways to do fixing. At common, you have starting column, which is just a 3-mana mana rock. It also has start your engines. When you get to max speed, you can sacrifice it to cash it in for card. Night Market is a cycling land that can just be any color, so that's pretty useful if your deck is a little bit greedy on color. Marshall's Path Cruiser is a vehicle that comes in, searches for a basic land, and the land goes to your hand, but doesn't ramp, and then it has a 5-color thing. So if you're doing the 5-color thing, you maybe want the Marshall's Path Cruiser, but maybe not, because in a format these days, especially one that I'm predicting is going to be really fast like this one, 3 mana just fetches you a land. Is that really that good? Probably not. And crew 5 is a lot to have to crew. Lumbering World Wagon, on the other hand, at rare, it does cost green, but this is only crew 4, and whenever this vehicle enters or attacks, you can search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So actually ramps you. Definitely something to consider if you're in a deck that wants to ramp and wants the fixing. You can also get a 3-mana rock vehicle with Velo Heart Bike, and that's only 2 to crew, but it is a 4/2, which is kind of a bit iffy in terms of stat line, but maybe you can trade it up. I don't know. There's this enchantment, Point the Way, also 1 mana to start your engines, so that's something to consider. Green doesn't have a ton of start your engines. The thing is, 4, sacrifice this enchantment, search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is your speed. Put those cards onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. You probably want to get at least 3 lands with that. You've invested 5 mana at this point, and then that means that you've been attacking and you're already doing okay. So I don't know about Point the Way. It looks bad to me, but maybe there'll be a couple decks that can make good use of it. But yeah, I'm not excited about Point the Way. But it is there. If you're really desperate, you can go and spend 5 mana to ramp yourself 1 and fix yourself. There's also a 1-mana dork. It's a little fiddly. It's Molt Tender. You're going to have to exile a card from your graveyard to get the mana of any color with it. Black-green especially has no problem putting cards in the graveyard. So if you are black-green splashing out to something, maybe Molt Tender goes up in value. It can tap to mill a card, so it can give itself its own fuel, but it is a bit slow that way. But something to keep in mind, especially in the late game, should have no problem tapping it to give yourself mana. The final way to fix yourself in this format is there are a couple cards that make treasure. We have Gilded Goda, a 2/2 horse mount. When it attacks while saddled, create a treasure token, and it is only saddle 1. So it's going to take you 2 creatures and an open attack with your 2/2 to get a treasure token. I wouldn't necessarily count on that, but it exists. It's there. If you're just a red deck and you can play it as a bonus, I think that's fine. You can see over here, Rocketeer Boost Buggy is a 3/2 vehicle that is red and green, and when it attacks, it makes a treasure. And it does have an exhaust ability to make it a creature permanently as a 4/3. So that's probably better if you happen to have some green. Ticket Tortoise, also a common here, 3/1 defender. When it enters, if an opponent controls more lands than you, create a treasure token. And that's not too hard to do if you are on the draw. You just play the tortoise on your turn 3 and then drop your land, and you've got your little treasure bonus. So you can accelerate into the next turn with a bonus. So I like Ticket Tortoise actually a lot. There needs to be more catch-up mechanics printed into Magic. So just a 2-mana common, 3/1, it crews stuff. Ticket Tortoise is something to keep an eye on. I don't know how it's going to play, but if you need that treasure, it's definitely something that probably will go up in the pick order. We've also got at rare Gonti Night Minister, not like super a build-aroundy, I don't think. Whenever a player casts a spell they don't own, that player creates a treasure token. And how are you going to cast spells you don't own? Well, whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller looks at the top card of that opponent's library, exiles it face down. They may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Mana of any type can be spent to cast a spell this way. And so then once you play the card, you're going to get the treasure, and then maybe you can play some stuff out of your own hand that the treasure is good for. It seems a bit fiddly to rely on a 4 mana with black 2, but it's treasure, it's in the set, so there you go. And then Monument to Endurance. This is actually pretty easy to activate because there's a lot of cycling in the set. So whenever you discard a card, and cycling counts as discarding, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. One of the options is to create a treasure token. Now this is a 3 mana, does nothing when it comes down thing. But if you're cycling and you don't need the treasure, you can draw the card. And if your opponent is low, you can make them lose 3 life. I think it's probably playable. It takes a little bit of a build around cost with Monument to Endurance. So that is the mana bases. Keep that in mind as we talk about archetypes. Okay, we have reached the meat of this video here. It's the archetypes, and it's not just this slide, the 2-color archetypes, but we're going to talk about some of the hidden decks, some of the build-arounds that I've seen when I've been going through the card file. Really interesting, some new and different archetypes here. So let's talk about them. For Aetherdrift, in white-blue, we have the Guidelight Voyagers, which are an artifact value. And what does that mean? Well, we're going to break down each of these specifically and kind of show some deck skeletons. But probably not that surprising, blue-white doing some kind of artifact thing. And blue-black is what they're calling Artifact Bleeder. The race team is called the Speed Demons. And that one's also interesting. I put that one at the very end of the video, this section of the video. So we'll talk about that. Black-Red's team is called the End Riders. They are max speed aggro. So you're used to red-white usually being the most aggro. It looks like they're going for black-red in this set. We'll talk about whether that is actually true, whether there may in fact be a mono-red aggro deck in this set. Green-white is the Alacrian Quick Beasts, which is a vehicles and mounts mid-range as they are casting it. What's interesting is that red-white is vehicles and mounts aggro. That's Cloudspire, just skipping ahead there to the bottom. I've kind of tried, as I go through these, this is not the order we're going to go through them, but as we go through these, I've kind of tried to group them so that similar and overlapping archetypes are next to each other, so we'll talk about that. White-black, Champions of Amonkhet, max speed attrition. Blue-red is the Keel Haulers. It's a bunch of pirates, and it's discard aggro as they're casting it. But really, it's just like cycling, drawing cards, good value. Well, that deck is maybe actually the most interesting deck to me. Black-green, well, Graveyard, and I put Graveyard Reanimator. They are the Speed Brood and doing their Golgari thing, but maybe with a little bit of a vehicle twist in this set. Red-white, Cloudspire, vehicles and mounts, as we talked about. And then green-blue, we have another Exhaust Ramp. It's not characterized as mid-range, so I guess it's Exhaust Ramp, more control. They're the Ether Rangers. We'll take a look at that and see what each color is trying to do. Of course, the best way to do that for each color is to start with the signpost cards. Every single one of these 2-color pairs has 4 signposts, as it were. 5 of them have Gearhulks. In the case of red-green, we've got the Pyrewood Gearhulk, 2 red-red, green-green. Vigilance Menace 7/7. When this creature enters, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Menace until end of turn. Damage can't be prevented this turn. So it is your Crater Hoof of the set. Unfortunately, it itself cannot attack, although there are ways to give haste in this set if you happen to have more mana. Hopefully you saw the mana base portion of this video, and you can see how possible it is to actually cast the Gearhulks in this set. Spoiler, if you haven't, it is possible to do it. they will probably be at least one turn off curve, even if you are building your deck around it. At least that's what the estimate is, according to the smart people on Reddit. We have a Redshift Rocketeer Chief for a red and a green. It's a 2/3 Vigilance, legendary creature, Goblin Pilot. Taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is its power, but you can spend that only to activate abilities. And then we see Exhaust, 10, a red and a green. Put any number of permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. That's a little bit pie in the sky for limited, I think. Maybe you'll get there in a game, and that'll be a lot of fun. Get Redshift's power way up. But by the time you're getting there, haven't you pretty much dumped your hand? Anyways, Exhaust is a one-time activation ability. Now, if you can blink the creature that, and it's usually a creature, I guess, that has Exhaust, then you get it a second, you get to exhaust it again. And there are cards that'll let you exhaust more than once, which we will get into, because obviously red-green is exhaust themed. Every 2-color pair has a vehicle. For red-green, it is the Rocketeer Boost Buggy, which is red and green for a 3/2 vehicle. When it attacks, you make a treasure, and it has exhaust. So this vehicle becomes an artifact creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for 3 mana. Crew 1. And I guess what this is telling you, I think red and green are the colors that you want to splash in the most. And the exhaust thing is what it is, but crew 1 is good for a vehicle. I'm not super high on vehicles, but it's a vehicle-based set. There's a lot of support for vehicles. There's a lot of pilots running around. So it shouldn't be too hard to attack with it and get your treasure, if that's what you want to do. And then Boom Scholar, I'm much more excited about. It's a 3 mana 3/3, so 1 a red and a green. Exhaust abilities of other permanents you control cost 2 less to activate, which is good because there's a lot of exhaust things. It itself has its own exhaust ability for 4 red and a green. Creatures and vehicles you control gain trample until end of turn. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. So again, another overrun type effect, but this time at uncommon. So let's take a look at the actual colors here. What kind of rares might draw you towards this archetype? Well, we got Boom Mobile, which is an artifact vehicle for 2 red. When it enters, add 4 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to activate abilities, and it itself has its own ability. So fail case, you ping something for 1 and put a +1/+1 counter, so you get a 6/6 vehicle that crews for 2. But if you want to use for one of your other exhaust abilities, say for the Dragonautics Engineer's second exhaust ability, make a 4/4 red dinosaur dragon creature token. That's pretty good. And then the Dragonautics Engineer also has exhaust for red. Other creatures you control gain haste until end of turn, and it gets a +1/+1. Really solid 2-drop. Like that one a lot. In green, at rare, we have the Afterburner Expert, which is a 4/2 for 3 mana, 2 and a green. Exhaust 2 green. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this guy 4/2, buff it up, make it a 6/4 attack. They remove it. You do another exhaust ability because you have a lot of exhaust abilities in these colors. It comes back. It does its thing again. It's pretty. Should be pretty strong, especially if you can regularly get those counters on it, which you pretty much should. These are ramp colors, as we saw. Let's keep on this bottom row here and look at the Elvish Refueler. For 2 and a green, you get a 2/3 Elf Druid. During your turn, as long as you haven't activated an exhaust ability this turn, you may activate exhaust abilities as though they haven't been activated. So lets you redo the exhaust abilities over and over again. Pretty solid body already, and itself has its own exhaust ability, so you can just, if nothing else, you can be pumping it up and making it go tall. I like Elvish Refueler a lot. There's some weird, interesting things you can also do with it with some of the rares, which we'll talk about later in this video. Stampeding Scurryfoot is a 1/1 for 1. It's a little mouse, and exhaust for 3 and a green. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and make a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Love it. So good in the early game. Well, not great in the early game, but solid in the early game. And then by the time you have 4 mana, it's bringing another body. And of course, if you can combine it with the Elvish Refueler and make a elephant every turn, that's pretty good. Above that, here we got the Adrenaline Jockey is a 3/3 for 3. Whenever a player casts a spell, if it's not their turn, this creature deals 4 damage to them. That's probably more of a constructed line of text. But again, once you activate lots of exhaust abilities, because whenever you activate an exhaust ability, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. I'm not as super high on the Adrenaline Jockey, but it is another exhaust-based combo or exhaust-based synergy piece. On the other hand, Grease Wrench Goblin is looking pretty good. It is a red mana for a 2/1 Goblin Artificer and exhaust for 2 in a red, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards and put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So make it into a 3/2 and, you know, loot some lands out of your hands. It's basically everything you could want. Also the ability to crew 2 vehicle the turn it comes down makes Grease Wrench Goblin a pretty high pick. I've said this before in the video, and I'll say it again, I'm sure, but this looks to be a pretty fast set to my eyes, and so I'm thinking 1-drops are going to be very relevant in this set. Greenbelt Guardian, 1 and a green for a 2/2. For a green, target creature gains trample until end of turn, and that is a very relevant activated ability in this set. We've got a lot of big old beefy creatures that don't have trample, including a whole cycle of vanilla legends. Like there's a 7/2 in black, and we'll talk about those more later. But I really like this be able to give trample, and then it has an exhaust where it can become a 5/5 for 4 mana. So again, just relevant in the late game. Not the best rate, but you can Boom Mobile into it. The 4 mana is a nice sweet spot if you do end up getting Boom Mobile for an exhaust ability cost. We've got Spire Mech Cycle. It's a 5/4 haste vehicle. It exhausts to tap another untapped mount or vehicle you control, and then this vehicle becomes an artifact creature. So that's permanently. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each mount and or vehicle you control other than this vehicle. And again, being able to give that trample, so you beef this up and you make it an, I don't know, an 8/7 or something. If you can pay that green and give it trample, that's going to be pretty big and pretty threatening. Hazard of the Dunes for 3 and a green. It's a 4/4 trample reach, which is just a nice stat line there. Exhaust is pretty expensive, 6 and a green, but you get to put 3 +1/+1 counters on this creature. So it becomes a 7/7 trample reach and becomes an even bigger threat. And of course, if you can activate the exhaust turn after turn, it just eventually will win the game for you. In terms of artifacts that have exhaust here, we have Camera Launcher. It is 2/2 for 3 mana, artifact creature construct. The exhaust ability is 3, and you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you make a 1/1 Thopter token with flying. Like that a lot. Anything that's going to add an extra rectangle to the battlefield. I don't think any deck is going to go out of their way to have this, but if you are an exhaust deck and you want just a couple more ways to activate exhaust to get some of these payoffs we talked about, the Camera Launcher is something to keep an eye out for. And of course, you can also use cards like Pit Automaton, which can tap for 2 colorless, which can only be used to activate abilities. But as you can see, Exhaust is very hungry for that mana. And it has 2 in a tap ability also. When you next activate an Exhaust ability this turn, copy it, and you may choose new targets for the copy, which is interesting because put 3 +1/+1 counters on this creature. That's not a target. So I guess it's only if the ability has a target on it. And do any of these exhaust abilities actually have targets? I guess the Boom Mobile does. So you could duplicate your Boom Mobile exhaust ability. Okay, so that was the red-green version of Exhaust Ramp. Now let's look at the blue-green version. At Mythic, we have Sabsunin Luxa Embodied, which is, spoiler alert, on my Windmill Slams pick list. It is a 5 mana 6/6 with Reach, Trample, and Indestructible. Okay, but what's the drawback? Well, it can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it, which includes 0. So the turn it comes down, it will be able to block. But at the beginning of your first main phase, you put a +1/+1 counter on Sab Sunin. Then if it has an odd number of counters on it, draw 2 cards. So the turns it's not able to attack or block, it's going to be drawing you 2 cards. That sounds pretty good. Plus there's plenty of ways in green to add counters to it. So you can also maybe combat trick fool some people with it. I think Sab Sunin is going to be super, super, super strong. And maybe you're going to get sick of playing against it on Arena. Because everybody's going to want to draft it and play around it. At rare, we have Sita Varma, Masked Racer, legendary creature, human rogue. It is a green and a blue, and it is 2/3. And it has just one ability, which is Exhaust X, green, green, blue. Put X +1/+1 counters on Sita Varma. Then you may have the base power and toughness of each other creature you control become equal to Sita Varma's power until end of turn. So probably at least 2, I guess. You could do X = 0, and you could make everything have 2 power. And if you have a bunch of 1/1 Thopters, that may be a way to win the game. Otherwise, because this is a ramp deck, you could be doing this for a lot, and you can just overwhelm everybody, maybe with a Sky Serpent Seeker, a 1/1 flying Death Touch that becomes like a 6/6 flying Death Touch. It has Exhaust 4, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal 2 land cards. Put those land cards onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And again, that's not basic lands or anything. You're just flipping over till you hit those lands. And it gets a +1/+1 counter. Flying is good in this set because of the speed mechanic, where you're going to want to try to deal damage every turn until you've done 4 turns where you've done damage. And yeah, Flying Death Touch blocks anything, trades with anything. I think if you're in green and blue, you're just going to take as many of these as you can get. The vehicle for the blue-green, the signpost vehicle here, the uncommon signpost. Ranger's Ether Hive, 1 in a green and a blue. Artifact Vehicle Vigilance, 3/5. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, you make a 1/1 Thopter. That's pretty good. Good reason to be activating exhaust. And it takes only 1 to crew, so once you've made 1 Thopter, you've got your 3/5 Vigilance, and that's pretty good. Pretty good blocker. So let's take a look at what would go in the deck here. We have Mindspring Merfolk as a rare with a nice exhaust ability. That's going to buff up all your Merfolk. There's not too many Merfolk running around, but it itself is a Merfolk. And we saw Afterburner Expert already. 4/2 with exhaust, 2 in a green, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature, and it can come back from the graveyard to the battlefield. Other than those 2, those were the only rares that really jumped out at me for this archetype. We're looking at stuff like Sky Streak Engineer, which is a 1/3 flyer for 1 in a blue, and it has exhaust, 4 in a blue, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. So it becomes a 3/5 flyer if you got nothing better to do, and maybe you don't. Ranger's Refueler is a 3/3. This is the kind of like standard 3/3 wall thing, but now it's a vehicle, and whenever you activate an exhaust ability, draw a card. Exhaust for 4, this vehicle becomes an artifact creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So 4 is a nice toughness break, so if you can get it to that 4, and crew 2 is not terrible, and being able to draw off exhaust abilities is nice. So Ranger's Refueler, I think this is the deck for it. I don't know if any other deck's going to want it or play it, but there it is. Keen Buccaneer is an Octopus Pirate, 2/3 Vigilance for 2 in a blue. Exhaust for 1 in a blue, so very cheap exhaust cost here if you're looking in the market for that. Draw a card, discard a card, and put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Sabotage Strategist is a 2/2 for 2 blue. It is flying and vigilance. And whenever 1 or more creatures attack you, those creatures get -1/-0 until end of turn. So a bit defensive, being able to die to everything that does 2 damage. Not that exciting to me, but it does have an exhaust ability. 5 blue, put 3 +1/+1 counters on this creature. So I guess if there is a really slow blue deck in the format, it might want Sabotage Strategist. Pit Automaton, we talked about being able to double up your exhaust abilities and being able to get 2 extra mana for them. Refueler, we talked about being able to double up, triple up, quadruple up your exhaust abilities. Also pretty good. Stampeding Scurryfoot, we talked about all these green guys and the camera launcher in the previous set, but just the same thing. Getting that value, getting that ramp, drawing those cards, Simic doing Simic stuff. And that is green-blue exhaust ramp. Now let's take a look at what's going on with the graveyard here. No surprise, the Golgari colors were in the graveyard doing graveyard things. We've got a Debris Beetle, which is a 6/6 artifact vehicle with trample. And when it enters, each opponent loses 3 and you gain 3. So that costs 2, a black and a green. That's not too bad. And a cruise for 2. That's at rare. The fact that they put that at rare and not uncommon is interesting to me. That maybe suggests it's a little better than it looks to me. I think it would be, a strong uncommon, but maybe it looks like a weak rare. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of Debris Beetle. But let's move on to Achik, Emerald Radiant, 3 black, black, and green, legendary creature insect druid. It's a 3/3 for the 6 mana, but it enters and creates a 1/1 green insect creature token for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. And of course, these are the self-mill colors. And then whenever another insect you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Achik, and each opponent loses 1 life. And there are a lot of insects in these colors, not just the tokens that you're creating. So anything that comes down makes a bunch of rectangles. I don't think it'll be that hard to build around Achik. It's kind of just doing what this color pair wants to do. It is a bit steep. I don't think it's like a bomb, but not like the Swarm Keeper where the things were flying and they had death touch and stuff. Is that what it was called? The Swarm Keeper? The guy from Duskmourn, which was only 4 mana also. All right, let's look at the uncommon signposts. We got Broodheart Engine at the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil 1. So again, just being able to fill that graveyard / get card selection. And then if you're ready, you can pay 4, sacrifice, return target creature or vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield, and activate only as a sorcery. So it becomes a reanimator. And as you'll see, there's cycling in this set. You can even see it with the next uncommon signpost here. So it's really easy to get some big creatures into your graveyard, the ones with cycling anyway. And there's actually, I think, kind of a hidden archetype built around that, which we'll talk about later. So this is pretty good. I don't like doing nothing to the board for 2 mana. On the other hand, 2 mana, not that much of an investment. There's some artifact synergies, the card selection, everything. This is one you're probably going to dread if you see it on the opposing board because they've hopefully built around it. It's either going to be played by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, or it's going to be assigned somebody who really knows what they're doing and you're in trouble. All right, let's look at Thundering Broodwagon. This is our vehicle for this color pair. 6/5 Menace Reach. When this vehicle enters, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 4 or less. Kaboom! So it is 6 mana, and there is a white 6 mana thing that also is removal. 6 mana vehicle, which is interesting. Crew 3 is kind of meh. On the other hand, you can cycle this for 2 and put it in the graveyard. So if you're doing the Broodheart Engine thing, again, it's 6 mana, but you can spread it out over a couple turns. And it comes back. Of course, that doesn't bring it back as a creature. There are ways to bring it back as a creature, because Crew 3 is kind of hard to do. Let's look at some of the cards that you might have in your black-green decks. Well, Agonosaur Rex, that goes in everything. It is a 8/8 trample, but the reason I put it here is because you can cycle it for 3, and when you cycle it, you get a combat trick, which gets 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature or vehicle, and gives it trample and indestructible until end of turn. And then once you put it in your graveyard, well, guess what Golgari is going to do? Well, let's see. Migrating Ketrodon is the Agonosaur Rex at home. It's a 6/6 dinosaur, has reach, enters, you gain 4 life, so it's sort of the honey mammoth of the set, and it cycles for just 2 mana. No effect there, other than you get to draw the card. So if you look immediately below the Ketrodon, there is Back on Track for 4 and a black, which is back to the standard cost for this effect. It used to be, or it was 4 mana. in the last set or two, but in this case, it's back on track. You can return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You also get a little pilot that comes with it, so you can bring back, if it is a vehicle, and you have a way to crew it, as long as it's crew 3 or less. Quag Feast, not to skip over the rares, but this rare is good in any deck, but obviously in a deck that wants to mill itself, what you do is you choose target creature, planeswalker, or vehicle, you mill 2 cards, then you destroy it if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. So it scales with the game. Initially, it's going to be able to hit 2 mana value and less, and then as you're adding more to your graveyard, which you very easily can do in these colors, then it's going to get better and better. Dredger's Insight. Let's take a look at this. This is, what is it, Malevolent Rumble at home. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green. Whenever 1 or more artifact and or creature cards leave your graveyard, you gain a life. Okay, that's probably more of a constructed combo thing. But the main effect here is when this enchantment enters, you mill 4, then you can put an artifact, creature, or land card from among the mill cards into your hand. So that Malevolent Rumble type effect, you can put at least 3 cards in your graveyard, possibly 4, if you don't want back a permanent or you don't hit a permanent of those types. And then Bob's your uncle. This is probably one of the best ways to fill your graveyard. Unfortunately, it is uncommon, not common. So anyways, keep an eye out for Dredger's Insight. We've seen that kind of effect be pretty good in green. You have Rise from the Wreck, which is a 2 and a green, 3 mana sorcery. Return up to 1 target creature card, up to 1 target mount card, and up to 1 target vehicle card, and up to 1 target creature card with no abilities. Keyword, with no abilities, from your graveyard to your hand. So if you are filling your graveyard, Rise from the Wreck actually can be a 4-for-1, a creature, a mount, a vehicle, and no abilities. Yeah, it's a possible 4-for-1. So it's possible 3 mana draw 4 in Magical Pie in the Skyland. How often are you going to do that? Probably not that often, but on the other hand, you probably play this effect if you can get 2. You know, it's kind of a divination, a green divination, in the right deck. So something to keep in mind. You can probably also play this deck without any copies of it. Pothole Mole is 2 and a green. This is the, what was that farmer called? For a 2/3, enters, mills 3, and you can return a land from your graveyard to your hand. Solid role player. Could be a little better than a solid role player, depending on how much you want to have in your graveyard. Definitely good for hitting land drops and just, you know, getting you past 3 mana. So I think decks will definitely be playing Pothole Mole. We've got Ooze Patrol for 3 and a green. It's a 2/2, but when it enters, you mill 2 cards, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. I think it was a Moldervine something, or there was one from Innistrad, the recent Innistrad sets, that just came down, was a big card, I think for 5, did a similar thing. So Ooze Patrol probably won't be too hard to have it be 4/4 at least, and then there'll be some amount of decks that will be able to make this huge. The thing is giving it trample, but that is possibility in green. There's a combat trick that gives +4/+4 in trample, and there's a creature that for 1 green mana can give something trample. So Ooze Patrol, self-mill, and does its thing. We talked about Quag Feast. We talked about Back on Track. Let's move on to Carrion Cruiser. This is a 2 and a black artifact vehicle, 3/2 stats. When it enters, you mill 2, and then you can return a creature card or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand, and it crews for 1. Not too thrilled about this one. It is uncommon, which maybe suggests it's a little better than I'm thinking. The kind of like Raise Dead effect of the format. Raise deck that leaves behind a vehicle in a set that likes vehicles. I think there's more powerful things you can be doing for 3 mana, personally, but there it is. This is the deck for it, if there is a deck for it. We've got the Chitin Gravestalker for 5 and a black. It is an insect warrior. Remember I said there would be insects in these colors. again, another big creature that you can cycle into the graveyard for 2 mana, has cycling 2. And it costs 1 less to cast for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. So if you're doing the self-mill thing, this is sort of like the... Well, it doesn't have ward, but it kind of reminds me of some of those big creatures that get the discount from Dominaria United. We got Deathless Pilot, 1 and a black, 2/2. I like this guy a lot better. This is just a common zombie pilot. And it saddles mounts and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So I think maybe there are a few things that are crew beyond 4, but this will really do any of those. And the nice thing is if you're self-milling, you can bring this back from your graveyard to your hand for 3 and a black. So in the late game, you can kind of recycle it. You can sacrifice it to effects and then bring it back. Kind of expensive, but it can be a value play. And as a baseline, just a 2/2 for 1 and a black. That's not too shabby. Final card here that I wanted to show for this deck, we have Wickerfolk Indomitable. It's an artifact creature Scarecrow, 4/3. You may cast this card from your graveyard by paying 2 life and sacrificing an artifact or creature in addition to paying its other costs. So if you are doing the self-mill thing, if you are doing the artifact thing, this fits in. It is 4 mana, so you probably don't want too many of these, but it's there as a role filler, and it will probably be really annoying for when you play against it with opponents just bringing it back over and over again. Now let's talk about max speed aggro in black and red. We have the Coalstoke Gearhulk, 1 black, red, 5/4 menace death touch. When it enters, put target creature card with mana value 4 or less from a graveyard onto the battlefield. So from a graveyard, could be your opponent, under your control with a finality counter on it. This creature gains menace, death touch, and haste. At the beginning of your next step, exile that creature. So get a big hit in. If you've self-milled with some of those black cards we just talked about, you can bring something back. You look for ETB abilities to bring back with this. 5/4 menace death touch is also no joke. So pretty strong card. Coalstoke Gearhulk, probably going to be casting at least 1 turn off curve. So think of it as a 6 mana card for those effects. And that's if you've managed to build your mana base correctly, as we talked about in the mana bases section. The rare for this color pair, we get Far Fortune, the End Boss. Legendary creature, human mercenary. Has start your engines. I think we've talked about max speed. If you don't know, it's just it comes down, your speed is 1, and then each of your turns where an opponent loses life, it increases, getting up to max speed, which is 4. And almost all the start your engine cards have a max speed ability. In this case, the max speed ability is if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 1 instead. We've seen these damage doublers be pretty strong, especially if you're building around it with a lot of little guys that get doubled. And the fact that it has another ability, whenever you attack, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that's going to guarantee that you're going to be increasing your speed when you attack with it, at least for that turn. So that is for Far Fortune End Boss. Gastel Thrill Seeker picks up that mantle in the start your engines way. Black and a red, Lizard Berserker, 2/3. When this creature enters, it deals 1 damage to target opponent and you gain 1 life. So guaranteed at least speed 2 when you play this, because it's going to start your engines, put it at 1, and it's going to deal that damage, so that's going to take it to 2. And then max speed, it has death touch and haste. So once you're getting up to speed, it is it's a definite threat. It can definitely tangle with that death touch. And then Apocalypse Runner is the vehicle, the signpost vehicle for this color pair. 2 a black and a red. 6/5, tap target creature you control with power 2 or less, gains lifelink until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. The lifelink thing is kind of weird to me for an aggro deck. I don't think that's as relevant, although it's always good. We always want the lifelink in limited. But 4 mana to basically you're going to be able to get in with one of your little guys and keep that speed building, I guess is the idea. It seems a bit expensive to me. Also, Crew 3 we know is much worse than Crew 2, and way worse than Crew 1. So not super high on Apocalypse Runner. We'll just have to see how the deck performs. Maybe you do want one of those, but I would let those go around. I wouldn't necessarily take those as a signal. So, lots of creatures work very nicely with aggro archetype in this format. We've got the Burnout Bastronaut, which is your only way in red to start your engines on turn 1. It's a 1/1 menace with start your engines. For 2 mana, it fire breathes. It gives +1/+0, and then max speed. It has double strike, so it becomes just an absolutely bonkers threat once you hit max speed. So Burnout Bastronaut, also good at helping you get to max speed with menace. Blah. Max speed menace. Try to say that 5 times fast. Hazaret Godseeker. You know people are going to draft this. This is a tricky card to make work, but this is probably the deck for it. 5/3, indestructible haste for just 1 and a red. What's the drawback? Well, it can't attack or block unless you have max speed. So it does have start your engine. You're going to get the speed going on turn 2, which is, for limited, actually a pretty good time to get the speed going. And then it also has this ability to make a small creature so it can't be blocked. So you can get that speed going, and it will eventually become a threat as a 5/3. Now, there are 6 toughness creatures that can block it, but I guess if you're speedy enough, maybe you can be hitting in with Hazaret before that happens. It doesn't have trample. I don't know. I'm gonna wait and see with Hazaret. Could be good if you build around it properly, but it might also be pretty easy to avoid. We've got Howl Squad Heavy as another rare that works nicely in this color pair. 2/3, start your engines. It's a goblin mercenary itself, and it gives other goblins you control haste. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, it makes a 1/1 red goblin creature token, and that token does have to attack. So maybe you want to make the token unblockable. Maybe that's the idea. Max speed, tap, add a red for each goblin you control. I'm not really into these max speed, tap, add red in the aggro decks. Like, is the problem when they hit max speed that they need the mana? I don't think so. But Howl Squad Heavy is good anyway. We know this Goblin Lord type effect where it comes down and it's making a goblin every turn, especially if unopposed. It just wins the game essentially if they can't do anything about those goblins that are attacking. And of course, you can start combining those goblins with combat tricks. There's a combat trick that gives +1/+1, death touch, and indestructible. So the person thinks they're just blocking the 1/1 red goblin to keep it off the board, and then, oh, oops, they lost their blocker. We got Gastel Thrill Roller, is a 4/2 vehicle with trample and haste. And when it enters, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So kind of like a ball lightning. Just a 4/2, get in, smash in. It's crew 2 otherwise. And then it has the ability for 2 and a red to discard a card and return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. And you can activate that only as a sorcery. Keep it on the rare tip. Let's go down to the Gas Guzzler here. It's in black. It's the way to start your engines on turn 1 here. It's a 2/1. It does enter tapped, so you're not hasting it in and getting up to speed 2, but you can get that engine started pretty quickly. And then once it hits max speed, it's black. Sacrifice another creature or vehicle. Draw a card, so you can start just cashing in stuff for cards at max speed. But I think just a 2/1 for 1 with start your engines is going to be very playable regardless. Speed Demon at Mythic Rare is a 5/5 flying trample for 3 black. Has start your engines. So once you've got 5 mana, if you hadn't started your engines, you can then. And maybe you would be glad to, because at the beginning of your end step, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is your speed. So drawing 4 cards, but also losing 4 life is a bit of a knife's edge. But I think, if there's a deck that wants this, it's the black-red deck, because you're just trying to win as fast as possible. So hopefully you'll have the life and you'll be happy for the cards to get in there. All right, let's look at some of the uncommons and commons. We've got Mutant Surveyor for 2 and a black. Start your engines for a 2/3. It pumps for 2, gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and then at max speed you can pay 3, exile it from your graveyard to draw a card. Not that thrilled about that one. Gastel Raider, 2 and a black. Start your engines for a 2/1. When this creature enters, target opponent reveals their hand. Choose an instant or sorcery card from it. That player discards that card. And then once you have max speed, it's +1/+1 in menace. I like that better. There's some other black archetypes that are a little more attrition-y that would like to remove cards from the opponent's hand. The question is, how often is opponent going to have an instant or sorcery? I guess some amount of the time this is going to miss. So that's really going to depend on how good the Gastel Raider is, but I think it's going to be decent to great depending on how that shakes out with the format. Hour of Victory is an enchantment with Start Your Engines, but it does come with a buddy, a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Then at max speed, you can pay 1 and a black and Demonic Tutor. Sacrifice it, search your library for a card, put it in your hand. That seems pretty good to me. I think if I have to choose a 3-drop, maybe I'm going with Hour of Victory. The question is, by the time that you're spending the 2 mana to go get a card, could you already just be winning if you played something else? And the answer is probably yes. Red also has a 3-mana enchantment for 2 and a red. Outpace Oblivion. Start Your Engines. When this enchantment enters, it deals 5 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. And then for 2, sacrifice this enchantment, deals 2 damage to each player who doesn't have max speed. So once you get to max speed, you can just do the 2 damage and not take it yourself. And if you're just racing, you probably don't mind just doing 2 symmetrical damage. This is a great removal. 5 damage. And I guess we'll talk about that in the removal section. But I've already done the stats. 5 damage removes 94% of creatures in the format. So Outpace Oblivion is going to be a high pick. Guaranteed. Last card on the slide here. 2/1. Start Your Engines. So this is just a colorless Start Your Engines card for 2. Max speed, it gets +1/+2. Becomes a 3/3. Not a great bonus for the max speed, but if you want to start your engines as turn 2 at the latest, having a number of walking sarcophagi in your deck is a good idea. Take a drink here. Blue-red. Got to get my voice ready for my favorite archetype of the set. At least it is today. We got 1 and a blue and a red for a fish pirate, 3/3 haste. Gives vehicles you control haste, and whenever you attack, if a pirate and a vehicle attack this combat, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards. So there's stuff that cares about drawing 2 cards. There's stuff that cares about discarding cards. This triggers all of those. The question is, I mean, having a pirate and a vehicle attack is a little bit of a hoop, but a 3/3 haste for 3 is already baseline. Even if you don't do anything else with it, it's already pretty good. Another rare, Captain Howler, 2 and a blue and a red. Legendary Shark Pirate, Ward 2, pay 2 life. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, you draw a card. Okay. Broadside Barrage. This is a great reason to be in blue and red. It's a 3-mana instant, 1 in blue and a red. It deals 5 damage. We talked about 5 damage. Destroys 94% of creatures. And it comes with a draw card, then discard a card. And it can hit planeswalkers. Love Broadside Barrage. Boosted Sloop. Not so much. 1 in a blue and a red, 3/3 menace vehicle. Whenever you attack, draw a card, then discard a card. That doesn't mean whenever you attack with that vehicle. It's just whenever you attack with anything. And it is only crew 1 to crew. So as far as these 3-mana vehicles go, I like it. I just would rather have I'd take all the Broadside Barrages before I take 1 Boosted Sloop. That's how I feel. All right, so what kind of rares might draw you in? Well, we got Thopter Fabricator. As I said, we got a lot of cycling in these colors. So you're often going to be drawing your second card each turn. And when you do, you can create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. And once you've done that twice, you have enough Thopters to crew this to make it a 4/4 flying. So I like Thopter Fabricator. It's a little bit of build around, but if you have that critical mass of cycling, definitely run Thopter Fabricator. Ventwixt Verbose Host for 1 and a blue is an 0/4. It does have Start Your Engines. And it's not going to be increasing your max speed because it is an 0/4. Gives you no maximum hand size. But once you get to max speed, and I think it's very possible to get to in the more aggro versions of this blue-red deck, if you would draw a card, you draw 2 instead. And of course, if you're cycling a bunch, cycling your card to get 2 cards, now that is a deal. So 0/4 is going to be a good blocker. There's a big toughness break between 3 and 4. You're talking about 65% of creatures versus being toughness 3 or less versus 86% of creatures being toughness 4 or less. And there's just a smaller bump up there to the 94% of creatures at toughness 5 or less. So I think 4 is going to be a good blocker early on. Whether this is actually a good card, probably not, but it's a fun card. And you certainly, if you like to draw cards, it's not a hoop that's going to be too hard to jump through. We also have Monument to Endurance. It's just an artifact for 3, and whenever you discard a card, you can choose one that hasn't been chosen. So you can do the double draw thing with cycling. So one option is draw a card, one that hasn't been chosen this turn, I should say. You can make a treasure, or each opponent loses 3 life. So I think there will be some cycling decks that just cycle, play Monument to Endurance, cycle, make opponent lose 15 life. I don't know, or 21 life, 7 cycles. And there are some cards that cycle for as little as 1 mana in this set, and we've seen how powerful that can be. So let's see what else we've got here. I did pull out a lot of cycling cards to look at for this color pair. Grease Wrench Goblin is one you want to definitely have in your deck in this color pair. It's a 2/1. It exhausts for 2 and a red, where you discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards, and you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So that's a cheap 1-drop that's going to activate your drawing and your discarding effects. And what kind of discarding effects are we talking about? We're talking about the Marauding Mako. This is also an uncommon for 1 red. This time it's a Shark Pirate. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, which is unfortunate with that one that you like discard 2 cards. But whenever you discard 1 or more cards, oh no, you put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. So if you discard 2 at once with your Grease Wrench Goblin, great. Then now Marauding Mako is a 3/3. And it cycles for 2, so I guess if you top deck it really late and it's going to take too many turns to build up, you can just cycle it away. Then at 2 mana, you've got the Scrounging Skyray, which is a 1/2 flying fish pirate for 1 and a blue. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. So same as Mako, except it's flying. I would love a deck where you just put as many Makos, as many Skyrays as you can in a bunch of cheap cycling, and you just have a great deck built around these 2 uncommons. I'm really loving what this deck looks like. Not since Ikoria have we had a cycling deck that is so busted looking. We've also got Kickoff Celebrations for 1 and a red. This is an enchantment. This is your discard to draw 2 effect in red. In this case, it's an enchantment with Start Your Engines, and it has a max speed ability where you get to sacrifice the enchantment, and creatures and vehicles you control gain haste until end of turn, so you can kind of have a big surprise attack or something. I don't think that's super relevant. I think you're just playing it for the discard and the draw, and also because this deck really doesn't want to get stuck with too many lands in hand. At 3 mana, we got the Magmakin Artillerist. This is a 1/4 elemental pirate. And whenever you discard 1 or more cards, this creature deals that much damage to each opponent. So talk about the deck where you just sit there and cycle and win. And it itself deals the damage when you cycle it. It cycles for 1 in a red. Keen Buccaneer, also a 3-drop, 2 in a blue, 2/3 Octopus Pirate with Vigilance. Exhaust for 1 in a blue, draw a card, discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Howler's Heavy says 3/4 Seal Pirate for 3 in a blue, cycles for 1 in a blue, and when you cycle it, you can give a creature or vehicle an opponent controls -3/-0 until end of turn. I don't think there's going to be a lot of great ways to use this. If you're putting this in your deck, it's because you want to cycle it. And then maybe sometimes you need a 3/4 body and it's there in your hand. You hadn't cycled it yet. You can also run artifact like Racer's Scoreboard for 4 mana. It has Start Your Engines. And when it enters, draw 2 and discard a card. And then once you get max speed, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. I'm not super big on this. A 4 mana doesn't affect the board. 4 mana is pretty late to be starting your engines. But I guess if you need more draw and discard effects, Racer Scoreboard is there at uncommon as an option. And then if you're getting up to 5 mana with this deck, which you maybe won't, but maybe if you do, you have Thunderhead Gunner, 4 in a red, Shark Pirate, 4/5 reach, discard a card, draw a card, activate only as a sorcery and only once each turn. So in the late game, just filter your draws, activate all your discard stuff. The fact that it only works as a sorcery is kind of annoying because you kind of want to be able to do it instant speed with all these guys that get the +1 counters. So I'm not super high on Thunderhead Gunner. I think you're going to be able to grab as many of those as late as you want. But it does fit in the deck. All right. White-green, mounts and vehicles. This has another Gearhulk. We've got the Bright Glass Gearhulk. This is maybe my least favorite of the Gearhulks. It's green, white. First strike, trample. When this creature enters, you may search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, and or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less. That's the key. So, I mean, 4 mana, draw 2 cards, even if they're small, is not too bad. You're going to have to build around. You're going to make sure you have at least 2 1-drops that you want to pull out of your deck. It is a pretty heavy mana cost to try and hit this. 4/4 first strike trample ain't nothing in limited, so you'll definitely play it. I just think it's maybe like sort of the least exciting of the Gearhulks for limited. For constructed, it might actually be the best because you can go grab 2 combo pieces with it for 4 mana. So ability to tutor up 2 combo pieces is very exciting in constructed. And I assume it'll have a price tag commensurate with that. At rare, we have Caradora, Heart of Alakria for 2, a green and a white. Legendary creature, Human Knight. When Caradora enters, you may search your library for a mount or vehicle. Reveal it, put it in your hand. And if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature or vehicle you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on it instead. So it's a tutor, it's hardened scales, it's 4/2 are the stats. I like it. I don't love it, but I like it a lot. Just a 4/2 that draws you a card that's very relevant. And, if you have a good mount or vehicle in your deck, we'll see some mounts and vehicles here. It gets even better. So that's Caradora. All right, let's look at the uncommons here. We've got Veteran Beast Rider. It's a green and a white Human Knight. 3/4. At the beginning of your end step, untap each creature you control. So if you're saddling or you're crewing, all those guys are going to untap as if they had vigilance. All your vehicles are going to untap that attacked, which is nice, so they can be back for blocking, which is one of the big drawbacks of vehicles, that you can't crew them for attack and for block. So even if they do have vigilance. So I like Veteran Beast Rider. It's just a good value. 3/4 for 3. You're basically, just based on that alone, you'd run it, but it also has 2, a green and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So it has a late game mana sink. Basically nothing to dislike about Veteran Beast Rider. Now, the other uncommon is not, in fact, a vehicle. We get a beast mount. Lagarin, Soul of Alakria, for a green and a white. It is a 1/1 flyer. And when it attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target mounts and or vehicles, because it is itself a mount. So it can get at least +1/+1, and I guess if you've saddled it, you've got at least one other creature. So if that creature that saddled it is a mount, then you got another outlet for the +1/+1 counter. Otherwise, you could just be building up a vehicle that you'll attack with later. I like it. 1/1 flying is a little bit weak, but saddle 1 is the easiest saddle to saddle, and flying is great in this format. As we've seen with max speed, you want to just be getting in, even if it's just for 1 damage, to build up that speed. All right. Mounts and vehicles are super supported, so we're going to have some extra slides for here. This is the white and 1 artifact slide for white and green. We've got Bulwark Ox at rare, 1 and a white, Ox mount, 2/2. When it attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So again, you saw if you're doubling up the +1/+1 counters, this is a great card to go along with it. Takes just 1 to saddle, and then you can sacrifice it to give creatures you control with counters on them hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So you can start building something else up and have this Ox mount as a backup. I think probably if you're attacking with it, you want to be building it up. So it's a little bit of a push-pull about, because you want to be able to have something it's worth sacrificing for. But it's all good stuff. Nothing is a downside there with Bulwark Ox, so you'll probably just run it in any of these green-white decks. Guardian Sunmare looks pretty fun. It's a 5/5 with Ward 2, 3 white, horse mount. When it attacks while saddled, and it does take 4 to saddle, which is a heck of a lot, but if you do, it's very powerful because you can search your library for a non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So once you've done it at least once, you've probably got enough to saddle it for the next turns going forward. It's definitely a win more card, but I think most decks that can draft it will play it. On the other hand, you have Salvation Engine, which is more of a build around. It's other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. It is a vehicle for 4 and a white, and has stats of 6, 10, but it takes 6 to crew. But whenever it attacks, return up to 1 target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And that's a mythic rare. Hard to evaluate. I mean, just coming down and giving all your artifact creatures +2/+2, and there are a lot of artifact creatures in this set, and of course the vehicles become artifact creatures. That's really good, but it's 5 mana for an Anthem that essentially does nothing the turn it comes into play. If you play this onto an empty board, if they've kept you off of crew 6, like what is this doing? Nothing. So Salvation Engine, high risk, high reward. Skyseer's Chariot for 1 and a white is an artifact creature vehicle that is a lot easier to get some value out of. It's a 3/3 flyer. As it enters, you choose a non-land card name, and activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate, and it is 2 to crew. Crewable flyers are always good. Being able to slow down activated abilities can be good. There's a lot of exhaust abilities. I don't think, is crew an activated ability? Could crew cost mana? I'm not sure. But if that's the case, then you can slow down your opponent crewing something. So yeah. We got Valor's Flagship, the legendary artifact vehicle for 4 white. So 7 mana total. Has flying, has first strike, has lifelink. It is 7/7. It crews for 3, but the great thing about it is you're like, well, I'm not going to cast that often. It does cycle for X, 2, and a white. And when you cycle this card, create X 1/1 colorless pilot creature tokens. With this token, saddles mounts and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 or greater. That cycling cost, you probably want to get at least 2, so you'd cycle it for 5. At 6, that's pretty good. 7 mana, you're casting Valor's Flagship. It's gonna win the game if you get it going. It's only 3 to crew, which is easy to do with these pilot tokens, and there are other things that create those pilot tokens. On the other hand, you could just throw into your deck a mythic uncommon, like Glory Heath Lynx. It's a 1 and a white, 2/3 lifelink. Don't even need to know the rest. That's already great. We know that's going to be great stats. But when it attacks while saddled, you search your library for a basic plains, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and it saddles for 2. So Fantastic card. Really like Glory Heath Links. It is going to be a rich get richer thing because the person that can saddle and attack with it is probably the person that's already ahead. But even if you're not drawing the planes with it, you are hitting. You have a 2/3 lifelink that's a great blocker or a great little attacker. Canyon Vaulter, 1 and a white. A 3/1 core pilot. When this creature saddles a mount or crews a vehicle during your main phase, that mount or vehicle gains flying until end of turn. That's pretty powerful, and I think that is reflected in the fact that this is an uncommon. There's a lot of 3/1s for 2 in this set, and that's going to crew up a lot of stuff, and it's not bad to get in if it happens to be an empty board, and then later in the game you play a big vehicle and you start smacking in with it in the air. I like Canyon Vaulter. We have Alacrian Armory. For 3 and a white, creatures you control get +0/+1 and have vigilance. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target mount or vehicle you control until end of turn. That permanent becomes saddled if it's a mount and becomes an artifact creature if it's a vehicle. So there are ways to almost play a creatureless deck here. Alacrian Armory, and then if you jump ahead to the end here, Guidelight Matrix, which is a 2-mana artifact. When it enters, draw a card. 2 and tap, target mount you control becomes saddled, activate as a sorcery. 2 and tap, target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Between those cards, you actually could play a deck that's only vehicles, and then you just have to get these cards to activate them. But it's I don't think it's a good strategy, but it is a viable strategy. Pride of the Road, 3 and a white. Creature, Zombie Cat Warrior, Vigilance, 2/5. Has start your engines. Very expensive to be starting your engines. But the max speed ability is nice. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature or vehicle you control gains double strike until end of turn. And it could be itself. A 2/5 double strike attack's pretty nice, especially if it has Vigilance. Cloudspire Captain is 2 and a white. For a human pilot, it's 2/3. And it's just a anthem for mounts and vehicles. Mounts and vehicles you control get +1/+1. And it's able to saddle mounts and crew vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So that is uncommon, but that is a great 3-drop to have in this kind of deck if you're heavy on the mounts and the vehicles. We also have Daring Mechanic for 3 mana. Another mana sink here. Just 3 and a white. Put a +1/+1 counter on target mount or vehicle. Looks like Mario, and I'm sure there will be lots of Mario jokes when Derek Mechanic comes around. But we haven't even seen what green has to offer this archetype. So let's take a look at that. And I'm going to wet my whistle. We have the Lumbering World Wagon. This is a 2 and a green artifact vehicle. This vehicle's power is equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever this vehicle enters or attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. It does take 4 to crew it. But green we've seen there's some good mana sinks. There's some ways to use vehicles even if you don't have the crew. So Lumbering World Wagon, and there's some ways to give trample. And this would be also good with trample. I'm not too high on Lumbering World Wagon, but it's there. And this is one of the better decks for it, I think. We've also got Ovia Automech Artisan. Each creature that's attacking one of your opponents has trample. Speaking of ways to give creatures trample. It has green tap. You may put a creature or vehicle card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put an artifact onto the battlefield this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So again, this kind of effect, usually not that great, even in limited. If you happen to have some really big stuff, you can kind of build around this, but it's more of a fun card. I won't say too much more about Ovia. Thunderous Velocipede for 1 green. This is Mythic Rare artifact vehicle. 5/5, cruise for 3. Has trample. And each other vehicle and creature you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if its mana value is 4 or less. Otherwise, it enters with 3 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So the big get even bigger. You really want to go heavy on the vehicles. The Velocipede will let you do so. But it is a 3 mana, doesn't affect the board immediately card. And artifacts... Oh, well, we talked about this in the removal section when I recorded that. Artifacts are very weak to removal in this set. There's a lot of artifact removal, so I would just keep that in mind before you go all in on vehicles. There's even removal that specifically hits vehicles too. District Mascot. Speaking of +1/+1 counter synergies, this enters with a +1/+1 counter, and you can remove 2 +1/+1 counters from this creature to destroy an artifact. And whenever it attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it saddles for 1. This little good little boy, good little corgi. It's Queen Elizabeth's District Mascot. We have the Venom Sac Lagak for 1 and a green. This is a 2/1 Death Touch, and yeah, you're gonna probably play that even, especially maybe even in sealed. Death Touch tends to go up in sealed because everybody's running their huge stuff. Being able to trade with that for 2 mana is pretty good. And if you happen to attack while saddled, it's going to attack as a 2/4, and it takes 2 to saddle. Rise from the Wreck, we talked about this in green-black, but also in this kind of set, or this kind of color pair where you got a lot of mounts, you got a lot of vehicles, and you got a lot of other creatures, and maybe you have some creatures with no abilities. You can get pretty good value in Rise from the Wreck. Defend the Rider. You can play this in every green deck for sure. This is an uncommon for a green. It's an instant. Choose 1. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible. And then the other option is to create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this token saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. That second mode is going to get the most use, I think, in this deck. So that's just why I threw it on this slide. Especially if you, depending on how you built your deck, if you're kind of a little bit too heavy on the vehicles, run those Defend the Riders and actually plan to use the second mode to make the pilots, so you can you have stuff to activate your vehicles. Like, well, let's do Fanguardian first. 3 and a green, 4/2 flash. When it enters, another target creature or vehicle you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Kind of expensive for a combat trick, but if you're talking about a combat trick that leaves behind a 4/2, it can also eat pretty, eat a 1/3 or something, eat a 0/4. So there's Fanguardian. Earth Rumbler at uncommon, 4 and a green, artifact creature vehicle with vigilance and trample, 7/6. So this is your big beater vehicle. It's only 5, which is not too bad for this kind of top end effect, and has the ability to exile an artifact or creature card from your graveyard to make it an artifact creature until end of turn, which is good because the crew cost is 3, and you might not always have 3, but you will probably have at least 1 artifact or creature card in your graveyard. And so use it wisely if you just have 1. Also 5 mana, we got the Alacrian Jaguar. If you want a mount for 5 mana, you can have one. It's a 4/4 vigilance. And whenever it attacks while saddled, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And it only takes 1 to saddle. So that's cool. We've seen the 6/6 stat is pretty strong in this format. 94% of creatures are less than it. So speaking of big stats, Autarch Mammoth is 4 green for an elephant mount. It's a 5/5. Anders makes a 3/3 elephant buddy, so you get an 8/8 of stats for 6 mana. If you can get up the 5 to saddle it, so you just need 2 more with the 3/3, then you can make another elephant. And again, the rich get richer. This is going to run away with the game on the right board where somebody can't deal with it. So Autarch Mammoth, one to watch out for in the format. But white and green is not the only colors that cares about vehicles and mounts. Maybe it cares more about mounts than vehicles, and white and red cares a little bit more about vehicles and mounts, but you'll see. There's a little bit going on in both. Collodin Triumph Caster, for example, for a red and a white, a legendary creature human pilot, is a 2/3 with mounts and vehicles you control. Have haste. He likes mounts and vehicles. And whenever a mount you control enters, it becomes saddled. And whenever a vehicle you control enters, it becomes an artifact creature. So it becomes crewed, essentially. CRUDE. We have Explosive Getaway for 3, a red and a white. It's a sorcery. Exile up to 1 target artifact or creature. Return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And we talked about the ability to blink here with exhaust abilities. But what you're really doing is you're going to save a creature while you do 4 damage to each other thing on the board. So it's a board wipe. We know board wipes are generally strong. 4 damage is going to hit 86% of creatures out of the gate. The problem with that is if it's, and this is sorcery speed, so they're probably not going to have their vehicle activated. And so it's probably not going to wipe their vehicles. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of the uncommons, we got Cloudspire Coordinator. It's a 3/1, enters, scries 2, has a tap ability, create X 1/1 colorless pilot creature tokens, where X is the number of mounts or vehicles that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. And they have that same text. They're going to crew as if their power, crew or saddle, as if their power were 2 or greater. The uncommon vehicle is Cloudspire Sky Cycle. 2 a red and a white. 2/3 flying. When it enters, distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 other target vehicles and or creatures you control. So it's 1 or 2. You can put them all on one thing. Just has to be other than this one, which shouldn't be too hard. But again, 4 mana, it does affect the board. Maybe as long as you've got a thing. It only takes 1 to crew. It is flying. I think I like Cloudspire Sky Cycle, but there's definitely a fail case for it. It's not a slam dunk. In terms of the white options, we basically talked through all of these, talking about the white green. So I'll just leave this up for 1 second if you want to pause it. And let's jump ahead and see what red is offering to the mounts and vehicles archetype. We got Chandra Spark Hunter, which is a planeswalker. I think it's the only planeswalker of the set. Comes down for 0, makes a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact creature token. And it has a static ability that's going to turn that vehicle, but only on your turn, into an artifact creature and give it haste. So at beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target vehicle you control. Until end of turn, it becomes an artifact creature and gains haste. If you can defend Chandra or opponent is not putting pressure, Chandra will run away with the game. That's it's basically making a 3/2 haste every turn. Or you can it's not terrible if they can get in on it because it has a +2 and you can start to sacrifice stuff for value and draw cards. The -7, you probably have a decent amount of artifacts if you're in red, but it's not that great of an ultimate. But I just think that making a vehicle every turn, and then of course you can sacrifice it for the +2 the next turn. It's just the classic planeswalker thing of like, well, you better have had presence on board before I played this, / a removal spell in hand for a planeswalker, or I just run away with the game and I win. But you maybe don't know it yet. It's not deterministic. We'll have to play it out for 7 more turns. That's Chandra Spark Hunter. The other rare I put on this slide here, Gastel Thrill Roller, is a 4/2 artifact vehicle. Trample Haste. This is the one we talked about that's kind of like Ball Lightning. Comes in, it's a creature. It's 2 to crew otherwise, and for 2 and a red and discarding a card, you can bring it back, but with a finality counter, so it's not coming back that second time. In terms of vehicles that also come in and have an effect, we got Burner Rocket, is 1 in a red, flash for a 3/1 vehicle. When it enters, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. So there's combat trick. We talked about how trample is pretty good in this. It's only 1 to crew, but a 3/1, you know, how much is this going to survive? Probably not a lot. We've got the Dynamite Diver, a 1/1 for 1 red. Saddles and mounts as though its power were 2 greater, and when it dies, deals 1 damage to any target. I love Dynamite Diver. I'm going to be putting a lot of Dynamite Divers in my red decks. Road Rage is a piece of removal that cares about mounts and vehicles. It's instant speed, deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, where X is 2 plus the number of mounts and vehicles you control. So basically going to put it in any red deck, but this is the best place for it. We've got Gilded Goda. I'm not super high on this, but I just saw Jim Davis's breakdown of red in the set, and he was a big fan of this. I don't think you're going to be attacking with it saddled that often, but I guess it doesn't take that much. It's just baseline 2/2, and it's a mount for all the mount synergies. And if you happen to get the treasures, that's pretty good. Reckless Velocitower, the Minotaur pilot. We have Minotaur pirates too, but this is a Minotaur pilot. Minotaur? How do you say it? Minotaur? Whenever this creature saddles a mount or crews a vehicle during your main phase, that mount or vehicle gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. But it's only a 3/3 for 4 mana. So I think you really want to be able to get that ability, but it's 4. I'm not into Reckless Velocitar. Spire Mech Cycle is 5. It is a 5/4 haste vehicle. With exhaust, tap another untapped mount or vehicle you control, and it becomes an artifact creature. So it's only 2 to crew it. And it gets a +1/+1 counter on it for each mount and or vehicle you control. Of course, that is an exhaust ability, so you can only do it once, but it will be really big, depending on how many mounts and vehicles you manage to keep on the board. And it's haste, so you can slam it the turn it comes down. Definitely will be a threat in this deck. At colorless, we have equipment vehicle in Rover Blades. That is a 3 mana 2/2 equipment vehicle. It has double strike or gives the equipped creature double strike. The equip cost is 4, and the crew cost is 2. So it's a 2/2 vehicle that crews for 2 that attacks with double strike, or you can slap it on whatever you're crewing for 2 for 4 mana and give that thing double strike, which essentially, say you were using a 2/2 to do that. I guess it makes more sense to crew rather than equip, because then you save on mana. And on a big old trampling creature, it's pretty nasty. So I don't hate Rover Blades. I don't know how often I'm going to play it, but definitely going to get beat by it. It probably goes up in sealed for the right deck that can slap it on the right thing. Maybe more for the artifact synergy archetypes, which we will see coming up. So keep Rover Blades in mind for those. But if you're also in the market just for a 5 mana colorless vehicle, you got the Skybox Fairy. It's a 4/4 flyer, crews for 2, and it can cycle for 2. So there are reasons you would want a vehicle in your graveyard. Not necessarily, well, actually, no, there is a red reason and a white reason you would want your you would want a big old chunky vehicle in your graveyard. So Skybox Fairy is there. It's common. You'll probably be able to get lots of shots at it, unless flying vehicles are punched way above their weight class, in which case you might not be able to. Final card on this slide, Dracosaur Auxiliary, Dinosaur Dragon Mount, 4/4 flying haste, and if you manage to saddle it for 3, and it attacks while saddled, it can deal 2 damage to any target. So it can hit for 6 to the face, but you have to saddle it for 3. It seems just a little bit expensive in terms of mana cost to be good, but 2 damage is going to be able to hit 42% of the creatures printed on cards, and even more percent of the creatures that you're going to see on board, because those are the type of creatures that tend to get played more often, and we've also got tokens running around like these pilot tokens. So to be able to come down and ice a pilot token maybe actually will bump it up. We'll just have to see how the format plays. Dracosaur Auxiliary, it's there if you need it. Balloon Black, Artifact Bleeder is what they called it. Never heard somebody use the term bleeder. I think it means sort of like an aristocrats thing. Well, let's take a look. We have another Gearhulk here. 4/4 lifelink, ward 1 for blue, black, oil deep Gearhulk. And when this creature enters, look at target player's hand. You may choose a card from it. If you do, that player discards that card and then draws a card. So it's all optional. You don't have to make them discard the card. If they got a whole lot of nothing in their hand, you just leave it with the nothing. Otherwise, you have to make an intelligent guess about if the card you're making them discard is better than the median card in their deck. So you have a good chance that they're not drawing into something better. I think most of the time it's going to hit. It's this ability generally is more powerful than it looks, and of course, lifelink is already good in limited. So you're probably going to run Oil Deep Gearhulk if you can, and you know, try to warp your mana base to make it work. At rare, we have Winter, Cursed Rider. Winter is back. He is a blue and a black this time for a 3/2. He has Ward, pay 2 life, which is not a great ward cost. People just pay that. But he gives all the artifacts you control Ward, pay 2 life, so he's going to protect your artifacts a little bit. Then he has the Exhaust ability, 2, a blue and a black, and tap. Exile X artifact cards from your graveyard, and he doesn't have any way to put artifacts in your graveyard. But each other non-artifact creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. So if you get Winter, I think I would go back, look at the Golgari, and look at the Self-Mill in black. It's definitely very easy to go heavy artifacts in these colors, in this format. So a powerful ability if you build around it, but is it a little hard to build around? I think so. What are they going to say on limited resource? Build around B? Build around B+? Excuse me. Let's look at Haunt the Network. This is a 5-mana sorcery, 3 a blue and a black. You choose an opponent. You make 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, and you do want lots of artifacts in blue-black. I guess that's partly telling us. The chosen player loses X life. You gain X life, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So baseline deals 2, you gain 2. Leaves behind 2 1/1s. I think this will be the finisher card for this deck. If this is going around late, you know this deck is open and you can move into it. And this is could be kind of like the cycling deck in Ikoria, where if you just get a ton of artifacts in this card, you can win. I hope I'm not overstating that, but it's just a possibility. It's a possibility. Haunted Hellride is the signpost vehicle here. It's 1 blue black. Whenever you attack, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn, and untap it. That's just an ability. It's sticking out there. It's a 3/3 crew 1. It doesn't have any evasion itself, but I guess if you crew it, it attacks as a 4/3 Death Touch and untaps, so it can be back to block. Meh on Haunted Hellride. I think there's better artifacts for 3 mana that can sit around. Now let's take a look at what black is offering the artifact bleeder archetype here. We got Demonic Junker, which is sort of the leyline binding of the set here. It's 6 and a black, but it has affinity for artifacts. It is a vehicle. It's a 4/3, cruise for 2. When it enters, you destroy up to, or for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. If a creature you controlled was destroyed this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this vehicle. So if you have an artifact that you're done with, or you might benefit from going to the graveyard, you can make this even bigger. I don't think you're going to use that mode that often, but in this deck, this can be like, 1 or 2 or 3 mana removal spell, and then it's just upside. You can somehow recycle it, it gets even better. Also at rare, we talked about Monument to Endurance. I don't know why I have that here, actually. I guess just because it's an artifact that sits out and gets you value throughout the game. We do have cycling and things, especially in blue. Crypt Caller Chariot is another vehicle. It's 3 and a black, menace 5/5, cruise for 2. And whenever you discard one or more cards, and again, remember cycling works with that, you create that many tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So another kind of build around, if you want to go heavy on the more of the cycling thing, play this. It doesn't do a lot, even if you cycle something the turn it comes into play. But eventually you're just making too many 2/2 black zombies for anything to happen. Grim Bauble is a common. It's an artifact for 1 black. You're going to play as many of these in your black decks as you can draft, but this deck likes it especially because it is an artifact that just sits out on the battlefield. So it enters, gives target creature and opponent controls -2/-2 until end of turn. If you have to, you can eventually pay 2 black, sacrifice it, and surveil 2. Another cheap artifact that's a creature to put out. We got Wretched Doll. It also has black tap, surveil 1. That's a 3/1. Wreckage Wicker Folk, I like a little better. It's a 1 and a black. This is actually a common. The other one, the doll, is at uncommon. This is a 1/3 flyer. Enters, surveils 2 automatically. And the reason I like the stats here is just the max speed thing. 1/3 flying is great. The surveil 2 is nice in the decks that care about graveyard, especially green black. So Wreckage Wicker Folk is one I think people should look out for. But especially in this deck, you just want cheap artifacts on the board so that when you cast your 5-mana spell, you drain for a bajillion. Carrion Cruiser, we talked about this. This is just a little bit of value here because it's an artifact. It can bring back a creature or vehicle and cruise for 1 if you need it. Oh, I wasn't ready to flip over to blue yet. Ticket Tortoise is another cheap artifact. It's a 3/1 defender, and it can actually make another artifact. So it's 2 artifacts for the price of 1 in some situations where it makes the treasure. Ripclaw Wrangler. When this vehicle enters, each opponent discards a card, and it's a 4/3 crew for 2. Not as excited about these more expensive things. You got a number of choices here at 4 mana. Packed All Terror is also 3 and a black. Whenever this creature or another artifact you control enters, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. That's better, I think, for this kind of strategy of just playing a ton of artifacts and winning through kind of drain effects. There's also an uncommon Wicker Folk Indomitable, which is an artifact that can come back from the graveyard as long as you're sacrificing an artifact or creature. Guidelight Matrix is just an artifact that essentially cycles itself, cantrips itself. It's a 2 mana. When this artifact enters, draw a card. Maybe you'll use the mount or vehicle ability, maybe not. But in this deck, maybe you don't care. Maybe you just are happy to have the artifact sitting on the battlefield and have it replace itself with the draw. In blue, you have Muyan Ling, which comes down and makes an artifact with herself. You have Thopter Fabricator, which we talked about. It can make a bunch of 1/1 colorless Thopter artifacts. It is itself an artifact. Midnight Mangler for 2 mana. It's a 1 and a blue vehicle. 3/3 crew 2. During turns other than yours, it's an artifact creature. So nice little blocker, and then just sits around and is an artifact for all the artifact synergies. Ranger's Refueler, another 3/3 vehicle. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, draw a card. This is uncommon, and it has exhaust ability itself. It becomes an artifact creature, so it becomes a 4/4 if you want to pay 4. Otherwise, you got to crew it for 2. Diversion Unit is a 2 mana, 2/1 flyer. I think every deck's going to want this in blue because there's a 2/1 flyer for 2, first of all. And then blue sacrifices creature, counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 3. So that just sits out and threatens your opponent to counter their removal. Or their board wipe, and there are board wipes in this set. But especially in this deck, it's a nice, cheap little artifact. Maybe you get in and get a bunch of damage, and so then when you cast your sorcery and drain, you don't need as many artifacts on the board. Guidelight Optimizer is also a 2/1 for 1 and blue, but it is on the ground. Artifact creature robot. Taps to add blue, and you can spend only to cast an artifact spell or activate an ability. So it works with exhaust abilities. Doesn't mean artifact ability. Artifact spell or activate an ability. And 2/1, I think, will hold down the ground. There's a bunch of 3/1s and stuff. You'd probably just be happy to trade if you have nothing to use the mana for. Ether Siphon, not a super fan of this. But here it is. If you're doing the mill thing, or you want to do the start your engines thing. It's 3 mana and then 2 tap to draw a card. So it's essentially 5 mana to draw a card. And once you get up to max speed, whenever you draw a card, each opponent mills 2 cards. And that can win you the game if it's a stalled board. But otherwise, I'm not super fan of Aether Siphon. Nimble Thopterus, on the other hand, I've picked as one of my top commons in blue. And it's using Rectangle Theory. It's a 3/2, but it also comes with a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, which is the best token. This thing can crew stuff. And it just comes with a friend, so if they remove it, you still get the friend. Love it. Hull Drifter. This is a play on Mole Drifter, but unfortunately does not have the 3 mana mode. So it's 5 mana for a 3/2 flyer. Does draw you 2 cards when it enters. If you're in the mood for a 5 mana draw 2 that leaves behind an artifact, this is the card for you. I think it might be a little bit expensive and hard to play. But I could be wrong. I guess if the format ends up much slower than I thought, Hull Drifters will be very good. Spike Shell Harrier is the blue turtle shell from Mario Kart. It's 4 and a blue for a 4/4. When this creature enters, return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If that opponent's speed is greater than each other player's speed, reduce that opponent's speed by 1. This effect can't reduce their speed below 1. So if it's 2, it goes to 1. If it's 3, it goes to 2. If it's 4, it goes to 3. Otherwise, does nothing. But a 4 mana 4/4 that bounces something, or 5 mana 4/4 that bounces something, I think you're going to play. And you especially like it in decks that care about artifacts. And of course, what's another great reason to care about artifacts? Well, we have these 2 affinity for artifacts. One at uncommon is an artifact itself, which is ridiculously awesome. It's a 3/4 flyer. Love Memory Guardian. I think these kind of decks are going to want lots of Memory Guardians. Will they want Gearseeker Serpents? Maybe not. Maybe one as a finisher. It's a 5/6, and it has this 5 and a blue, can't be blocked this turn ability, so it is just a finisher. And it's a pretty decent blocker. 6 toughness is going to stop most of the stuff, including some of the big vehicles. But it doesn't have like ward or anything. Would have loved to see it with like ward 2 or something, just to make it a little bit better. Maybe it would be too good. So that's the blue and black version, but what is the white and black version? What they're calling artifact value. I thought we were getting good value out of blue and black. Well, let's see. Riptide Gearhulk is 1 white, white, blue, blue for a 2/5 double strike. Prowess. And when it enters, for each opponent, put up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. So it's like a Teferi effect. This is a really awesome one. You're definitely going to want to twist your mana base to play this if you can play it. Yeah, not much to say about that. I don't think that says anything necessarily about the archetype. Mendicant Core Guidelight maybe says a little bit more. It is a white and a blue. Its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control, and it's a star 3. And it has start your engines, so if you want to do some max speed things with this, once it gets up to max speed, whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 1. If you do, copy it. I don't know how often that will happen. That is a very good ability, especially if you really are building around artifacts in these colors. For example, Voyage Home, talking about affinity for artifacts, this is 5 a white and a blue. You draw 3 and gain 3 life. Fantastic. I think this deck will run as many of these as it can, because that gain 3 life really keeps you around, and then you just get the advantage. Drawing 3 is huge, and I think most of the time you'll have at least 2 artifacts, so it's 5 mana. Like the fail case, I guess 7 mana you don't play, but if it's 5 mana is your more normal fail case, I think you play this, and oftentimes it'll be a lot cheaper. You have Guidelight Pathmaker. This is less exciting. This is the vehicle signpost. 4 a white and a blue for a 6/5 vigilance vehicle with crew 2. When it enters, you can search your library for an artifact card to reveal it, put it onto the battlefield if its mana value is 2 or less, otherwise put it into your hand, then shuffle. So as long as you built your deck somewhat around this. You can guarantee you got the crew 2 for it. On the other hand, 6 mana for a vehicle, vigilance, there's no evasion. I'm not super into it. Maybe run 1, test it out, but Salvation Engine, we talked about a lot of these cards. This giving artifact creatures +2/+2. If you can make a bunch of Thopters, maybe it's still a high risk, high reward card. Nesting Bot, on the other hand, I think you want as many of these as you can get. It's a 1-drop, starts your engine. When it dies into a 1/1 servo artifact creature token, so it just leaves behind more ability to crew, and again, the artifact, so it leaves behind an artifact too. Once it gets to max speed, it doesn't get that much of a bonus, it just becomes a 2/1. But it's done its job. It's a good little nesting bot. You got Interface Ace, which is an 0/4 that can saddle mounts and crew vehicles using toughness. And whenever it becomes tapped during your turn, untap it. But that triggers only once each turn. But that's okay. So you can use it to crew on the, on the attack, and use it to crew on the defense. Keep in mind that we have cards like Sundial Dawn Tyrant, which is a 3/3 artifact creature construct. It is legendary, and it is vanilla, but it's overstated for its price, and it's got that artifact right there in the type line, so pretty nice to have. Spot Cycle Scouter is the 1 in a white. Enters, scries 2, a 3/2 crew 1 vehicle. Guidelight Matrix, we've seen this come up in a number of archetypes here. Because we do have mounts and vehicles in white, it's going to be able to use all its text, and the artifact sticking around, as we know, pretty good, especially for the affinity things. Air Response Unit is a 3/3 Flying Vigilance Crew 1 for 3. Voyager Quick Welder is 2 in a white, 3 mana, 2/4. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. I'm going back and forth on this card. I've talked about how there is a lot of artifact-specific removal. There's also in white, a toughness 4 and a greater removal. So Quick Welder gets hit by those. On the other hand, the card I'm predicting is the number 1 common, the Lightning Strike, deal 3. It manages to survive that. Making all your artifact spells cost 1 less to cast is pretty nice. If it's the blue artifact with affinity for artifacts, it's like 2 affinity. On the other hand, it doesn't make your sorcery, well, I guess it does. The affinity sorcery costs 1 less. It doesn't get that bonus from that. Will be interesting to see. I don't know how much you're trying to ramp into big artifacts with this deck. I think in general, these artifact decks just want to have a bunch of little stuff and either get in really early or gum up the board and then win in the end with those like big haymaker cards, the draw 3, gain 3, and then play a big, I don't know, big vehicle or something. Alacrian Armory, we talked about this one already. 3 in a white. Creatures you control get +0/+1 and have vigilance, and it can activate mounts and vehicles. Guidelight Synergist. This is an interesting one if you're going heavy artifacts. It's an 0/4 flyer, but it's going to get +1/+0 for each artifact you control. So could be a pretty big threat in the air in the late game, especially if you can make a bunch of little Thopter tokens or things. Broadcast Rambler, 5/4. When it enters, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, as we said. And it crews for 1, so it brought along it brung its own pilot. We've got Detention Chariot for 4 white. This is the removal vehicle. It enters, it exiles an artifact or creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. And as I said, there are a lot of ways to blow up artifacts and vehicles, so spending 6 mana and then they just remove your removal. But it does cycle for just 1 white, which is pretty cheap. So we'll see what goes on with Detention Chariot. I'm not too high on it yet. I'll have to be proven wrong on that. In blue, we talked about pretty much all of these already. But yeah, just I think cheap artifacts, and then stuff on the top end, like especially the Memory Guardian, but maybe also the Gear Seeker Serpent. Team that up maybe with some removal, Blue actually has a lot of tempo-based removal in this set. So if you want to go for more aggro, something to consider. All right, I think we're down to our last archetype here. White-black, what I'm calling max speed attrition. I think they just called it attrition. But I think as you'll see, there's a lot of start your engines in white and black. So it's probably a little bit more aggro-y than attrition, as I would categorize it. First of all, you got Ketramose is a Menace Lifelink Indestructible God for 1, a white, and a black. The people very excited for this for Constructed, especially later formats. I think in Limited, it's going to be really hard to do, so I won't spend really any time on it. Just know there are cards that can put multiple cards into exile if you really want to build around it, but I think it's like a build around C or something. I don't know. If you actually build around it and get it to be able to activate, then maybe it's an A, because it's Menace Lifelink Indestructible is fantastic, but it can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile. We got Zahur, Glory's Past for a white and a black. Legendary Zombie Cat Warrior. It's a 3/2 with Start Your Engines, so good 2 mana to start your engines. We were thinking it's probably going to be good. Has a sacrifice outlet, a free sacrifice outlet that surveils, but you can only do it once per turn. So they're going to put a little safety valve on that one. And when you get up to max speed, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. And there's no limit on that. So if you have a different sacrifice outlet, you can just infinite ETB. Well, I guess no, because it's non-token. But there are probably ways to do infinite ETBs. But anyways, Zahur, it's just good value. I wouldn't necessarily build around it or let it draw me into these colors. But you do you. Let's look at the uncommon signpost. We got Embalmed Ascendant, 1, a white and a black for a zombie. It's a 1/2 with Start Your Engines. When it enters, it makes a 2/2. So it's 2 rectangles for the price of 1. We know that that is generally very good. And then the max speed ability is whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1, you gain 1. That's also a great ability. It's a little annoying to have to wait till you got max speed. That would be a great ability to help you get to max speed. But I think you just play this anyways, even if the max speed was a blank there. Dune Drifter for X, a white and a black is our signpost vehicle. It's a 3/3. Cruise for 2. And what does that X do? Well, when this vehicle enters, return target artifact or creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I guess this is more of the attrition thing where you're just recurring probably smaller creatures with the Dune Drifter, but especially if it's like Death Touch or something, it can be really annoying for opponent. They just thought they removed it, and then it's back. So what am I flagging for this deck specifically? Well, Nesting Bot is the black Start Your Engines. We saw there is a rare in black. There's a 1 mana, but Nesting Bot is uncommon. So this is your best way to start the engines pretty much in Limited. There are some of those lands we saw earlier in the mana bases section that will start your engine, but those are colorless lands. So I'm not super huge on those unless you're going heavy on these Walking Sarcophagi, the 2/1 zombie cats here that say start your engines. But anyways, Hellish Sideswipe, I think, you'll run that in a lot of the black decks. It's your sacrifice to, in this case, destroy. It doesn't exile, which is a big drawback. But if the thing you sacrificed was a vehicle, you do get to draw a card yourself. So that's a big plus with Hellish Sideswipe. And this is definitely a deck that can make use of Hellish Sideswipe. You can consider like the Nesting Bot, right? It dies into a 1/1, so that's a pretty good value. Leonin Survivor is 1 and white for a 2/2. Also has Start Your Engines, and it's going to get first strike during your turn. So it's going to attack pretty well. Hopefully keep that max speed building up, or keep the speed building up to max speed. And eventually you can exile it from your graveyard to draw cards. So if you did sacrifice it or trade it off, it can give you some value in the late game. Interface Ace for 1 and a white. That's the 0/4 that mounts and crews. Not sure why I put this here for the attrition thing, other than I guess if you're truly going for attrition and you're just trying to gum up the board for as long as possible, an 04 is going to gum up the board pretty well, and then being able to mount and crew makes it a nice utility player. Momentum Breaker is a 1 and a black enchantment, has start your engines. When it enters, opponent sacrifices a creature or vehicle of their choice, and that's kind of a womp womp because there might be some vehicles opponent doesn't really care about. But if they don't have any of those, they're going to have to discard a card, and that's pretty good. And then eventually you can sacrifice it to gain life equal to your speed. And I think this is the deck that, at least in the more the more mid-range, the more controlling versions of this deck, you'd be happy to gain 4 life or 3 life or 2 life, whatever. I guess minimum 1 life because it starts your engine when it comes down. Gastel Raider is a 3 mana start your engine. When it enters, you get to take something out of opponent's hand as long as it's an instant or sorcery. And then once you get up to max speed, +1/+1 and menace. Mutant Surveyor, also 3 mana. This is the common. Start your engines for 3 mana. For 2, you're going to have a pump, +1/+1. And then once you get max speed, has that same thing as Leonin Surveyor, where you get to exile it from your graveyard to draw a card. Kind of interesting. I don't know. You might want it in your graveyard more than you want to exile it for some versions of this deck. But something to keep in mind. Very, very filler level. Hour of Victory, 2 and a black, start your engines. When it enters, create a 2/2 zombie token, and then max speed, you get to sacrifice it to have a demonic tutor effect. Probably better in this deck where you're trying to go to the late game a bit longer. Roadside Assistance is 2 and a white, enchants a creature or vehicle, comes down, makes a pilot, and then the permanent is going to get +1/+1 and lifelink. So the right vehicle, or you can use this in other white vehicle-based decks, but in the right deck, given that lifelink, if you're trying to make the game go long, there's that. Swiftwing Assistant is a 3/3 flyer, starts your engines, max speed, gets +0/+1 and has vigilance. Okay. I mean, it might just be that 3/3, although 3/3 dies to the 2 mana instant speed that we know everybody's going to pick as their top common. If you just really need that critical mass of start your engines or flyers, I guess that Swiftwing Assailant is there for that. 5 mana, 4 and a black, Risen Necro Regent is another option. It's a 5/4, start your engines, and it actually has a good max speed payoff. At the beginning of your end step, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and not even tapped in this case. So pretty nice. If you can just play this on turn 5, you've already hit max speed, and it comes with the zombie, and then every turn it's going to poop out a zombie. So Risen Necro Regent, that is what I got to say. Okay. Now we're on to what is a lot of people's favorite part, the hidden archetypes. And I usually start with, is there a 5-color deck in the format? Well, they're pretty much telling you there is with Marshall's Path Cruiser. That's that 6/5 vehicle here, comes in, finds a basic land of your choice, puts it into your hand, unfortunately, but does have a Wooburg exhaust ability, becomes an artifact creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So becomes a 8/7 without trample. I don't think this is a great payoff. On the other hand, you probably will be happy to run at least one of these in your greed pile. But there are better things to do with your greed pile, like just play all. You saw already, there's so many of these 2-color signpost cards. We've got 3-color cards like Samut and Loot, which we'll talk about more specifically. If you are feeling dangerous, you can probably try to get some Gearhulks in your pile. I would go with stuff like, if red-green is sort of the best fixing, maybe Pyrewood Gearhulk is the one that you try to go for. Blue-green, also you can go with stuff like Sky Serpent Seeker, which has just a generic 4-mana exhaust ability that's going to ramp you. You want some starting columns, probably. That taps to add mana of any color. The Molt Tender can tap to add mana of any color. The Lumbering World Wagon can go grab you stuff of any color, although that is at rare. And then the Veloheart Bike can tap to add mana of any color. And the Rocketeer Boost Buggy, we think will probably be able to make you treasure pretty regularly, although that's a red and a green, so you're already kind of taxing your mana base to try and get that on curve in a greed pile. But you can run it. If you make those treasures, Bob's your uncle. So I mentioned loot. Let's say you get a loot, pick one, pack one. What can you do with loot? Well, it's already a pretty good card. It's 2/4 for 5 mana with Double Strike, Vigilance, Haste. Has 3 exhaust abilities. When something has Double Strike, you probably want to give it a buff, and you probably want to give it Trample. So Burner Rocket for 2 mana comes in, +2/+0, and Trample. Bestow Greatness is an instant, gives it +4/+4 and Trample. Greenbelt Guardian for a green can give it Trample. And then Elvish Refueler is pretty nice because let's say you've already exhausted the draw 3 cards, but then every turn you can just play the exhaust, draw 3 cards again off a loot, and just use loot as a repeated draw your deck. Or do the mana thing or the deal 3 damage to any target thing. Elvish Refueler is pretty busted with loot. So if you've got loot, look for the Elvish Refueler. You're building your Temur loot deck. Mimeoplasm, I didn't put this in the greed pile because I think you really want to be concentrated in Sultai. It's probably not that great, but if you are determined to build around Mimeoplasm, here's how I would do it. When it enters, you exile up to X creature cards from your graveyard. It enters with 3 +1/+1 counters on it for each creature card exiled this way. So I would try to cast it for at least 5 mana. So X equals 2 at least. And that means you want to have you need to have 2 creature cards in your graveyard. So you need some of the self-mill stuff. And then what do you want to pay 2 and make Mimeoplasm a copy of? That's the other thing you want to be thinking about with the creatures that you put in. Well, you got Market Back Walker, which when it dies, draw a card for each +1/+1 counter on it. So you can actually play Market Back Walker X equals 0, so it goes straight to your graveyard if you know you can Mimeoplasm it. And then whenever Mimeoplasm dies, you're going to draw 6 cards if you manage to get it 6/6. There's stuff like Scrounging Skyray has cycling, so it can go to the graveyard. Archfiend can go to the graveyard. Both of those have flying, so that's a good thing to give Mimeoplasm. Make it a 6/6 flyer. Agonosaur Rex has Trample, although this is at rare, but it has a nice ability. You can cycle it to the graveyard. You can cycle the Chitin Gravestalker to the graveyard just to have another creature, but it doesn't have any good abilities to give Mimeoplasm. On the other hand, there's stuff, if you can get it in the graveyard, like Streaking Oil Gorger. I don't really love this card for any archetype, but Flying and Haste is pretty nice. Mimeoplasm comes down, 6/6 Flying Haste, and then if you happen to get to max speed, it has Lifelink. That actually seems like a really good one to have the Mimeoplasm become. Greenbelt Guardian can give stuff Trample, and including itself. So Mimeoplasm could give itself Trample with that, and this exhaust ability to put more +1/+1 counters on the creature. So this could be one if you can get it, trade off with it early, get in the graveyard, cast your Mimeoplasm for X equals 1. It's a 3/3, but then the next turn you can turn it into this guy, and then the next turn you can exhaust and make it a 6/6 and give it Trample. That seems okay. Sky Serpent Seeker would be another one that's good. Make it Flying and Death Touch. And Magical Christmas Land, if you manage to get Sab Sunin Luxa embodied, exiled by the Mimeoplasm, it can become Reach, Trample, and Indestructible. And that is in these colors. So in the Magical Christmas Land, where you don't draw your Mimeoplasm, you just cast Sab Sunin, which is also a bomb card. Let's say you want to build a Samut deck. She is 3 a red, a green, and a white for a 4/5 first strike, vigilance, haste with start your engines. So I think you probably just are trying to start your engines before Samut comes down, because other creatures are going to get +X/+0, where X is your speed. So just look for cheap start your engine cards to get the engine started. And then non-creature spells you cast cost X less to cast, where X is your speed. I don't know what you're discounting. I mean, I guess you could do some kind of do you want to do too many vehicles? Maybe not. I don't know. But there's kickoff celebrations. which will get, you know, one less to cast, no matter what. So it'll just be one red and just help you get through your deck. I don't know. Just put cards in. Samut's good. Maybe she's a bit overcosted, but there doesn't seem to be specific, like, super great synergies. Now, here's one of my favorites to look at in any format. Hidden Archetypes Mill. And really, I think if you can do this with Ether Siphon at Uncommon. That's playing on super hard mode. I think you'd rather play on easy mode, which is a River Turn Monument, and you can build your deck around even if you only have one of those. So how would you do that? Well, you could stock up to look at the top 5 cards of your library and dig for the River Turn Monument. And there's also Repurposing Bay, where you can go try to sacrifice an artifact that costs 1 to go get your River Turn Monument. That's a little bit Magical Christmas, but what's great is, you know, you're saving up for that big exhaust. You get an opponent to have half their deck in their graveyard, and then you just hit them with this. But you can also do Elvish Refueler, so you can do the exhaust ability every turn if you have an Elvish Refueler. Otherwise, you just gum up the board. You got the 3/3 here, this vehicle that becomes a creature only during turns other than yours. There's these counter spells like Spectral Interference. There's lots of bounce spells like Roadside Blowout, stun spells, Install Out. The what do you call put it on top of your owner's library? Tuck spells, but it's not really tucking. It's just going to the top. But anyways, there's stuff like that, Trip Up, and then Unstoppable Plan actually has a nice synergy with this, right? So you can just mill 2, and then at the beginning of your end step, you untap it, and then you mill 2 again. So that lets you do mill 4 a turn, which can go pretty fast and limited. So can you do mill? Yes. Is it going to be good? Depends on how you build it. I think you probably could win with mill a bunch of the time if you get River Turn Monument, and there's a good chance that this gets past you and you get 2 of these, and then you're really off to the races and building your mill deck. I hope you see it. Send me pictures if you build an awesome mill deck. If you see Regal Imperiosaur, you might wonder, is there a dinosaur typal deck in the format? And yeah, kind of is my answer. All the typal synergies are going to make use of this Lifecraft engine, which turns all your vehicles into creatures of a particular type. So if you can combine that with 1 or more Regal Imperiosaurs, you probably want to do that. But you do have cheap dinosaurs here in red with Tyrox, Tyrox Saurid Tyrant, which is the 4/1 vanilla guy. So it becomes a 5/2 for 2 mana. Unfortunately, because of the legendary thing, it's hard to get a bunch of them on the board. But there it is. Otherwise, at 5 mana, you got a 9/7, and does a 9/7 really get that much better by becoming a 10/8? Probably not, but there you go. And you got some 6 mana stuff with Dracosaur Auxiliary as a dinosaur and Migrating Ketrodon as a dinosaur. And then if you happen to get rare, Agonosaur Rex is fantastic. So yes, you can kind of build dinosaurs, kind of. You probably really have to rely on the Lifecraft engine. It's more of a fun thing, but that is what's going on with dinosaurs. Similar story with zombies. We have Lord of the Undead, which is even rarer because it's going to be only in the special guest slot. But if you do happen to get it and you want to build a zombie deck, this is how you do it. You get this, you pair it up with Lifecraft engine. If you see one of those, you actually have some zombies here at 1-drop, 2-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop in white and black, 4-drop in white. And then if you Magical Christmas Land, if you also get a Bone Miser, that's available in the special guests as well. And that is a 5 mana 4/4 that whenever you discard a creature card, you make a zombie, and etc. Works nicely with, if you get that, you can do some cycling cards. Goblins, similarly, we have Howl Squad Heavy, which gives all other goblins you control haste. Possibly relevant with Lifecraft engine, but red and green has a bunch of goblins. Leave this up for a second so you can look at that but that's what's going on with goblins. And then here's here's a little theory crafting. You see all these cards that care about the plane of Muraganda. There was a card called Muraganda Petroglyphs that gave creatures with no abilities +2/+2. I've always loved this card. I believe it was a time spiral card. So this set does visit Muraganda, and to symbolize that, there is this cycle of legendary vanilla creatures: Tarion, Calaxion, Sundial, Tyrox, Kylorna. Probably you're going to be in green, and you try to get as many Fang Druid summoners as you can. That's 3 in a green for a 2/4 reach. When it enters, search your library and or graveyard, which is nice, for a creature card with no abilities, reveal it, put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle. There's also one non-legendary here in green, the Gibrick Omnivore, which is a 2-mana 3/2. So between all that, you definitely want to make sure you don't run the Fang Druid Summoner unless you've got those. Then you can start recurring a bunch of those guys, because you can get back at least 2 with Rise from the Wreck, because you get one of the options is a creature card with no abilities from your graveyard to your hand. You can put in stuff like a Thunderous Velocipede, which is going to buff up these guys and make them even bigger. But the main thing is you want Greenbelt Guardians if you can. Get those so you can give your 7/2 trample or your 9/7 trample, being able to give these guys trample. And there is the 2-mana instant speed in green, +4/+4 and trample. It wouldn't take very many attacks with Tarion giving it trample to win. So is this a good deck? It might actually be okay. We've seen strategies where you're just building up on these guys that find them all, the gotta catch them all kind of guys, and this looks better supported than a lot of those. So what was that wall that found more walls or found more creatures with defender and made birds? Ended up being really busted strategy. That's kind of, I mean, I don't think this is as strong as that, but it's kind of what this reminds me of. Okay, is there a mono red aggro deck in the format? I think the main thing that would push you towards that is getting this count on luck. Also Hazoret. This is probably a good way to play Hazoret. Just go with super cheap, light on lands, maybe as low as 14 lands. Is that crazy? But I would just run a bunch of cheap creatures, this stuff like Burner Rocket that buffs things up, Marauding Mako with the cycling stuff, kick off Celebrations to filter away lands, and just try and win as fast as possible. And to that effect, I think mono black can also build an aggro deck, especially if you get stuff like Bloodghast. It makes it much easier to cast Calaxion on turn 3 because it's black, and 1. So a 7/2 on turn 3, and then ways to, take advantage of that. I love the Engine Rat. That can just be kind of a win con in itself. It makes it easier to cast the spin outs if those are going around. So mono black definitely seems viable to me. Obviously, will depend on your pod. If black is wide open, maybe give this a shot and let me know. Send me a message and let me know if you built mono black aggro based on seeing what I had here. You got Risky Shortcut to start, just both players lose 2, but you're going to draw 2 and just fill you back up with gas. You can take some cards out of opponent's hand. You can finish them off with the Risen Necro Regent. Very start your engines based, I think. Seems very possible to me. All right. Is this the last one? I'm not sure. I don't have a map here. I've been talking and yammering for a while. The video will continue, however. We will talk about, I guess it's going to go into removal, combat tricks, my top commons for the set, Windmill Slams, bombs, all that kind of stuff. Still coming up in the longer version of this. If you are watching the shorter live version of this, then those things are probably already available to watch on YouTube as their own single videos. But let's talk about this could be a really fun thing to do, especially late in the format, which is a vehicle reanimator deck. You have at uncommon, which I'm sure is just going to wheel constantly, is 7 mana, Push the Limit, which returns all mountain vehicle cards from your graveyards to the battlefield. And you have to sacrifice them at the end step. So it's just a one-shot big attack, but vehicles you control become artifact creatures, and creatures you control gain haste. So they don't get exiled, so you could repeatedly do that if you get multiple Push the Limit. So you got to ramp up to Push the Limit, and you got to get a bunch of mounts and vehicles in your graveyard. But if you do, you can do a big one-turn swing. Probably the more reasonable way to do it is get a couple tune-ups, and then have stuff like Thundering Broodwagon, or Clamorous Ironclad, or Skybox Ferry that cycles, big vehicles that can cycle themselves into the graveyard. Detention Chariot can put itself in the graveyard. Valor's Flagship, if you happen to be able to get that into the graveyard, that's just a good 2-card combo with tune-up. And then Guidelight Pathmaker is a vehicle that can go search up a vehicle to put, or search up an artifact card for mana value 2 or less. So just increase your density of vehicles. I don't know. Maybe less to consider with this, but it's a big 6/5 vigilance. You can get it in the graveyard. And I believe, okay, we are now onto removal. So let's stop the recording here. Okay, removal in Aetherdrift. We're going to break down in terms of the toughness and what is available in each color in this segment right here. Starting with the toughness breaks. And that's what I call, if you think about red removal, something that deals 1 damage, how many creatures is that going to eliminate? And it deals 2 damage, 3 damage, 4 damage, 5 damage, 6 damage, 7 damage. There is more to removal in this set, especially than just that, as we're going to see. But this will give us a nice overview. And what we can see here is at 1 toughness, we've got 29 creatures. There are also 1/1 Thopters and Pilots. So 1 toughness is actually going to hit more maybe than you expect. There's just 1 vehicle that has 1 toughness. There's a red vehicle that is a 3/1. Otherwise, vehicles are generally bigger toughness. You can see as we go up the scale, 27 creatures at 2 toughness, 7 vehicles at 2 toughness, 3 toughness, 30 creatures, 12 vehicles, 4 toughness, 28, 6. Excuse me. So you can see how it kind of escalates. It's fairly even in terms of the amount of creatures that removal is going to hit. You got 29, 27, 30, 28 until you get to that 4, that break at 4. And then it's just 11, 3, and 4. And obviously, as you go up higher, you're going to hit more higher rarities. For this set, I just broke down in terms of creatures. I didn't remove the rares and mythic rares. We also have some creatures like Kaelorna over there that are super tough for very cheap with this cycle, this mythic cycle. They either have super high power or super high toughness. The mythic vanilla, or not mythic vanilla, the legendary vanilla cycle at uncommon. So that is the breakdown of how everything breaks down. We'll talk specifically about the actual cards. So red is a great place to start, obviously. For 1 mana, you can get Road Rage, which deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, where X is 2, plus the number of mounts and vehicles you control. So it's a 1 mana, deal 2 at least, and probably often 3 or 4. Red has no problem getting mounts and vehicles. There's also a little guy, a 1/1 Dynamite Diver, that when it dies, it deals a damage. So keep that in mind, I guess, for your X1s and how you value them in the draft. But the main thing is Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike deals 3 damage to any target. That's going to be almost definitely a top red common and probably a top common for the set in my prediction. And 3 damage is going to kill 65% of creatures. Now, not including vehicles in that, but 65% of creatures are going to be killed by Lightning Strike for just 2 mana at instant speed. You also have to take into account that a crap ton of this set is artifacts, including all the vehicles and some of the creatures. So Sky Crash, instant speed, destroy target artifact with cycling in the event that you're playing against a deck that's not running any artifacts for some reason. You can cycle it for just 1 red mana. Sky Crash is looking pretty good to me as a removal spell. It's looking very main deckable. Field of Flames. This is red's small board wipe here. 3 mana, 2 damage to each creature. I'm not sure what decks are going to want this. It seems like the red decks are pretty heavy on the small creatures. We've got stuff like Gastel Blockbuster right below that, a 3/2. When it enters, you can sacrifice a creature or vehicle, and if you do, destroy an artifact an opponent controls. So it could be a staple on removal right there with that. And but you have a lot of creatures like that, even at 3 or 4 mana, that are going to die to your own Field of Flame. So have to be careful using that. There might be some ways to do a combat attack. They block, they think they gotcha, and then you Field the Flames. Outpace Oblivion is a 3 mana enchantment. When it enters, deals 5 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. 5 damage is going to kill 94% of creatures in the format. So if you think about that, with the, and also in blue red, you can do 5 damage with Broadside Barrage. Those are killing almost everything, just the really big, weird stuff, the Kylornas and the rares and mythic rares that have the high toughness, super high toughness. There's a 6/6 in green that's not going to get hit by that. But for 3 mana, you can hit almost anything. And of course, Outpace Oblivion is at sorcery speed. Broadside Barrage can be instant speed. Crash and Burn, that's going to kill 97% of creatures in the format. Of course, it just outright kills any vehicle for 4 mana. So I'm liking Crash and Burn. I think that at common, you're going to be able to see this a lot. You're going to be able to pick it up, and every red deck will probably be happy with at least one of it, and we'll have to see how it plays out in the format. You might be happy to stack 3 or 4 into a deck, depending on how much removal and how good removal is in the format. My guess, my prediction is that removal will be quite good. We can talk about that as we look at white here. Because with vehicles, if they have, the vehicles are big generally and have good abilities. If they can't crew them, so if they have no creatures to crew them, they're dead cards. And if the vehicle is removed, then the creatures that crew are often not that great. So by having that ability to remove either the creatures or the vehicles, depending on the situation, you can kind of shut out your opponent, shut down their plan. I think it's going to be a pretty strong strategy. All right, let's take a look at what white has in terms of removal. We have Collision Course at 2 mana, deals X damage to target creature, where X is the number of permanents or vehicles you control that are creatures and or vehicles. So kind of your standard white, deal damage equal to the number of creatures, except this time it counts vehicles, except this time it's a sorcery. Seems not great, but it does also have the other mode that just outright destroys an artifact. And as I said, artifacts are very prevalent in the set. 62% of the set, in fact, is artifacts. So be that vehicles, creatures that are just artifact creatures, other artifacts that do things. 62% of the set is artifacts. So right off the bat, without even looking at the other mode, it is removing 62%. And I think that's probably why they made it sorcery speed instead of this effect is often instant speed. Something to keep in mind. On the other hand, you can get Gallant Strike, which is going to kill 35% of non-vehicle creatures and 51% of vehicles in the format. It also has the advantage of killing the best stuff. Destroys target creature with toughness 4 or greater. That's usually the better stuff. And can also cycle. So it has an out. Ride's End is really a 2 mana instant to exile a creature or vehicle that is tapped, but you can also do it for 5. These effects have generally been good lately. It's medium to good. We've got at rare, I just threw these in so you can be aware of them. Don't usually talk about rares in this section, but as I was being thorough, we've got Spectacular Pile Up, which is the board wipe, 5 mana to destroy all creatures and vehicles. And then Perilous Snare, this is 3 mana. When it enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. Now, again, so much artifact removal and probably going to be main decked. So I don't know about Perilous Snare, but it's something to keep in mind if you're drafting and you draft it early, you can have a piece of white removal that also does max speed things. In blue, not necessarily a color we think of as removal. There are some counter spells that I didn't put up here in blue, but we have a lot of ways to interact in a blue way. First of all, bounce off. This is looking like one of the best commons to me. Return target creature or vehicle to its owner's hand. So it's an unsummon that also hits vehicles. Stall out is tap target creature or vehicle, then put 3 stun counters on it, and it cycles. I think if this format is as fast as I'm expecting, a tempo play like this where you're just locking something down for 3 turns and keeping it from being a blocker could be pretty decent. Flood the Engine is, I guess, less, just lock it down permanently. It's a 3 mana enchant a creature or vehicle. When it enters, tap the permanent, and enchant permanent loses all abilities and doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Roadside Blowout. I really like this card. It is sorcery speed, which is tricky, but costs 2 less to cast if it targets a permanent with mana value 1, which is interesting. So you don't get the cheap thing if you're using it to remove tokens. But I think you're probably generally happy to pay 3 mana, bounce a thing, which is a creature or vehicle that an opponent controls, and then draw a card. Again, if this is a tempo set, being able to bounce blockers and get in and just slow down the game, or I guess slow down your opponent's game while you are getting in with your big 7/2 vanilla, whatever, it can be pretty good. 4 mana trip up. This is the, I guess, put a thing on top of the library effect. It also has cycling. It's instant speed, so you can use it as a combat trick. I think it's going to be decent trip up. We've got Roadside Barrage. We talked about that. If you happen to be in red, you can have access to some damage. And also a draw discard stapled onto there, which is relevant in the red-blue decks. Trade the Helm is a sorcery that lets you exchange control of target artifact or creature, and target artifact or creature an opponent controls. So this is interesting. Let's say you have a 1/1 Thopter token and you want to change it out for their big mythic. That can be done for 5 mana. I think in general these are pretty clunky. The fact that this cycles is interesting. I don't know. I don't know how Trade the Helm is going to play. It's maybe I'll know by the time I've analyzed the set a bit more, but it is sort of a removal spell slash just a chaos spell. On the other hand, Spike Shell Harrier is a 4/4 robot turtle. This is the Mario Kart blue shell as a creature. When it enters, you get to bounce a creature or vehicle an opponent controls, and then if that opponent's speed is greater than each other player's speed, their speed gets reduced by 1. So you can slow them down slightly if they're a max speed opponent, but the main thing is it's a 4/4 that bounces. So we know Marshall is going to be very happy with this card. 5 mana at rare, just to keep in mind, is sort of the control magic of the set. When this vehicle enters, gain control of target creature and opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle, and that creature can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. Just kind of ices something out, but you do end up getting a crew 3 5/5. I'm not sure how good that's going to be. Crew 3 is generally not great. On the other hand, icing opponent's thing and having a big vehicle left behind doesn't sound bad. But that's at rare, so we won't worry too much about that one. Let's look at black. Black is one of the traditional removal colors, and this set is no exception. We've got a -1 effect at instant speed with Locust Spray. We already talked about how, about 21% of the creatures in the format, not including tokens, get hit by this. But when you start including tokens, I think that'll raise it in value. There's a good chance this is main deck every time card, especially because of the cycling cost being so low. And then Grim Bobble, this is better, I think, because it's going to hit 42% of non-token creatures in the format with the -2/-2. And then it sticks around, and you can get that value with the Surveil So I'm really high on Grim Bobble. I'm making it one of my top black commons. We'll see if that bears out. But for 1 black mana, being able to hit 42% of non-token creatures in the format, that sounds good to me. You also get a non-restrictive removal here with Hellish Sideswipe. You just have to be willing to sacrifice a creature or vehicle. And if it was a vehicle, you get to draw a card. So that's going to be really interesting to see this kind of sorcery speed effect. It's not Exile, but it is Destroy. And Exile will be more relevant in this format because there is a decent amount of graveyard shenanigans going on. For 2 mana, Momentum Breaker, it's sacrifice effect enters. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or vehicle, and if they can't, they have to discard, so that's good. And then you can sacrifice it to gain life equal to your speed. I think these are good in multiples, but it is an uncommon, so how many multiples are you going to get? How much do you care about starting your engine? Momentum Breaker is tricky to evaluate, but right now I'm not putting it super high, but maybe there are some decks that are going to want it. Also, 2 mana, there's a rare that is sorcery speed. Choose target creature, planeswalker, or vehicle. Mill 2, then destroy the chosen permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. So the scales with the game. It's kind of weird, but you might want the mill in certain decks. We won't belabor it too much because it is a rare. What you are guaranteed to see a decent amount of is Spin Out, which is murder for the set. It's instant speed, destroy target creature or vehicle. The question is, because it's instant speed, you can wait until they crew the vehicle, so then it's a creature anyway. So is the vehicle part of it just kind of trinket text? Is it sort of just going to perform like murder? It does have the double black, which is interesting. The set has decent fixing, but you're not guaranteed to be able to cast this on turn 3. What else can I tell you about Spin Out? I think there are a lot of other ways to destroy creatures and vehicles for less mana, but I don't know. The question is, unrestricted, destroy any creature, instant speed. How good is that going to be? I think it's going to be decent, and it is common. So then the question becomes, okay, well, if this is common and every black deck will probably have at least one if they can help it, then how good are creatures really going to be in this set? That's the question. It is 2025 Magic. Every good creature comes with an ETB. For example, the Sheffet Archfiend. It's a 5/5 flyer. When it enters, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. So that's your black version of the board wipe. Again, we're talking about non-token creatures. That's 42% of non-token creatures getting wiped, including your own, potentially. I think black is potentially going to be running quite a few small creatures. Although there is a 1/3 flyer for 2 mana, so that would avoid dying to the Sheffet Archfiend. Archfiend also cycles, so it can be reanimated. But we'll talk about that in the other format. Let's go to the Siphon Fuel, our last bit of removal here. Target creature gets -6/-6 until end of turn, and you gain 2 life. It's instant speed. It's 5 mana. Seems like it is very playable. Remove a creature, gain 2 life is good stabilization. I think I didn't even bother to calculate it because 94% of creatures are getting killed by something that hits 5 toughness. So 6 toughness, I think, is 97%. I didn't write it down, but Siphon Fuel is going to remove almost anything. The question is, for 5 mana, how much do you really want to remove? It's going to line up poorly tempo-wise, is what I'm saying. Green, this is our final color to talk about here. Green removal suite. Well, the green removal suite in general. You got the fight spell, but it also destroys target vehicle, so that's nice. It's a 1 mana sorcery. Then you have the more premium, and that's an uncommon. This is a common. Run Over. Costs 1 less to cast if it targets a mount or vehicle you control. So if you're using a mount or vehicle with it, it can even be 1 mana instant speed. And it is a punch or a bite, I guess. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. So that looks like to be one of the better commons. Now, the question is Broken Wings. We've seen this a million times in a million sets. Usually it's a sideboard only card. Sometimes it's main deckable on the fringes. I think, and this is me going out on a limb here, this destroys 65% of non-land permanents in the format. This destroys well over half the non-land permanents in the whole format. With that in mind, because so many things are artifacts already, plus you're getting enchantments and creatures with flying, it is 3 mana, but it's also instant speed. I think Broken Wings is going to be a possibly top common and most definitely main deckable. That's what I'm going out on a limb with that, but we'll see how it shakes out in the format. If removal is as good as I'm thinking, then Broken Wings should be probably as good as it's ever been. That's my predictions for removal, and stick around and we'll find out about combat tricks. Oh, and I also need to add about colorless removal. We have colorless removal in this set, and our options are Aether Jacket and Scrap Compactor. Aether Jacket is 3 mana for a 2/1 flying vigilance that has 2 tap, sacrifice this creature, destroy another target artifact, activate only as a sorcery. So you're not going to surprise anybody because it's going to have to sit around to be able to do the tap ability. But once this is down, opponents going to have to think real hard about playing out any good artifacts. If they can't remove this, and it just sits around as a 2/1 flyer that is pretty annoying and can do max speed things. So I'm kind of liking Aether Jacket. I have a feeling it could be decent in this format. We also have Scrap Compactor, again, another artifact that's going to sit around. It's not flash, so you can play it for 1 and just have it there with the 3-tap sacrifice, deal 3 damage to target creature. As a threat, as we saw, 3 damage to target creature is hitting 65% of the creatures, so that's pretty good. And then a 6 mana tap and destroy target creature or vehicle. 6 mana just to hit anything. And this is colorless. This is going to go in any deck. So people should have removal. If people aren't drafting this, people will draft this. And if people are drafting this, then people won't draft creatures that they have to rely too much upon. That's my theory. I'm sticking to it. Let's go on now, for real, to combat tricks. Okay, talking about combat tricks, this is where we talk about in each color, if your opponent is in that color and they have a certain amount of mana open on their side, what do you have to worry about when it is combat time? That could be instant speed effects, that could be flash creatures, or in this set, it could also be effects that happen when you cycle, which we can see right here already in white. So let's take a look at what you have to worry about from white. The main one, combat tricks, of course, get better the cheaper they are. 1 mana, +2/+2. It also cycles, so if you can't get your opponent to walk into it, you can just cycle it away. Light Shield Parry, I think it will see some play. I don't know how much play. It doesn't have the main thing that makes a combat trick like this good, which is like adding a hexproof or indestructible to it. For 1 white mana, those are usually the ones that really overperform. We also have Gallant Strike, so if it's a double block situation and one of your creatures has toughness 4 or greater, look out for Gallant Strike. And then Ride's End is going to be a really tricky one. If you are attacking, you could worry about your thing just getting exiled for 2 mana. Otherwise, and as long as it's tapped, of course, there are a number of vigilance creatures in the set. Otherwise, you do have to worry if your opponent happens to have 5 mana open and you go to make a double block, you can get blown out here with Ride's End. There is Basri, Tomorrow's Champion. I made it small because it's at rare. Basri has an ability when he is cycled for 3 mana. Cats you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So super narrow, not super relevant to keep in mind, but it is out there, these cycle abilities, and we'll see more of those as we go through here. In blue, in terms of combat tricks, Bounce Off is going to be everywhere in my prediction. This is the unsummon of the set and can also hit vehicles. So look out for that. It's a very useful card, especially in combat, where you can get people blown out. They go to put their own combat trick on it or what have you. Howler's Heavy has a cycling ability for 2. That's why I put it in the slot right after Bounce Off. And it's going to give a creature or vehicle -3/-0 until end of turn. I wouldn't be super worried about this. It's more of a bonus. They might just blank your attack for a turn. Kind of hard to... There are some cases where you're going to lose combat to a Howler's Heavy, but they are kind of narrow. It is also a 4-mana creature that is a 3/4, so I don't know how often people will even be playing this in their deck. They might be cycling it more than they're playing it. Trip Up. This is a great blue removal spell in terms of how blue does removal. Put something to the top of the library and it cycles, so it doesn't get stuck in their hand too often. Do worry about your opponent having 4 mana up and doing a double block if they might have a Trip Up. Broadside Barrage if they're in blue and red. You have to worry about a 5 damage at instant speed. That's not great, especially with some first strike there in red. And then Wax and Shape Thief. This is a rare, so not super worrisome, but I guess it's a possibility. If opponent has a big creature, they can, maybe it's tapped or whatever. It was tapped to crew something, or it's tapped to attack. You go in for the crackback. They Wax and Shape Thief and duplicate their creature, and then they block and they eat your attacker. That is something that can happen and probably will happen in this format. In black, combat tricks, we've got Locust Spray, which is actually super annoying. Instant speed -1/-1. Just messes with combat math. And it cycles away for black, so it's pretty low opportunity cost for black to run this in their deck. Maximum Overdrive, I think you'll see a decent amount of this. It's +1/+1. It's Death Touch. It's indestructible. It's going to be really nasty in combat. You're hopefully going to be able to sniff out if opponent has one in hand, but it's still going to be annoying to have to play around. There's also Spin Out once opponent has double black and one other. Destroy target creature or vehicle instant speed. Just common. No restrictions removal. It's going to be pretty annoying to deal with. And then there's Siphon Fuel, which is a -6/-6, which outright kills almost everything in the set. I think, as we talked about 97% of creatures. And it is instant speed. It is something to be worried about if your opponent happens to have that much mana untapped during combat. In red, combat trick that will be maybe popular. We'll see how aggro red is. Pedal to the Metal. This is something to be worried about just to lose the game, right? If opponent has a bunch of mana open, being able to give a 1/1 that you don't block +X/+0 at instant speed is going to be something you have to worry about in this format. There's also this Burner Rocket, which is a flash vehicle that kind of comes down and gives +2/+0 and trample, almost as a combat trick. It's like a combat trick that leaves behind a vehicle. And then there's Lightning Strike. This is great, and everybody will be playing as many as they can. So watch out for Lightning Strike. Fuel the Flames is interesting when you think about it in terms of combat trick. Again, there might be first strike ways to use this, but red does have a lot of small creatures, so I'm going to be curious to see if any decks are even running Fuel the Flames. Broadside Barrage, we talked about, 5 damage, instant speed. And then there's Crash and Burn, blowing up a vehicle at instant speed / dealing 6 damage to target creature or planeswalker. One of the reasons blowing up a vehicle is going to be annoying, let's say you plan to crew a vehicle to block. They'll wait until you crew, and then they'll blow up that vehicle, and then you don't have any blockers. So Crash and Burn, I think people are going to be playing this card, even though it is the 4 mana red kind of clunky removal. I think it's less clunky than the usual big red removal, and that is why it will also be worrisome as a combat trick. And then finally, looking at green here for combat tricks. Green usually has a few good ones, and this set is no exception. Defend the Rider, instant speed. You can give indestructible and hexproof. You can also make a 1/1 blocker instant speed here with the colorless pilot creature token, and that will be an option in some non-zero amount of cases where you would rather just trade the 1/1 blocker for something that's X1 or use it to chump block, I guess. rather than give something hexproof and indestructible. But Defend the Rider looks to be pretty good, and it's only 1 green mana. It's going to be hard to play around, and it's going to get people a lot. Silken Strength is the sort of flash pump spell here. +1/+2, and Reach, which is a big one, because I do think flyers are going to be a factor in this set. Enchants a creature or a vehicle, and it untaps. So for 2 mana, pretty nasty, pretty hard to play around. Silken Strength looking pretty good. Run over. Green decks are going to run probably as many of these as they can. And instant speed, bite spell. Not much to say about that. Bestow Greatness, 3 mana, +4/+4, and trample. I don't know if this will get a lot of play. 3 mana is a lot for a combat trick. It is going to win a number of combats, but you can easily get blown out too when, 3 mana, your thing gets removed. That's going to be tricky. Broken Wings, like we talked about with anything that says destroy a vehicle, well, Broken Wings destroys any vehicle and any other artifact just in the destroy target artifact, not to mention the enchantments or creatures with flying. So Broken Wings, 3 mana, look out for that. Fang Guardian is a 4/2 flash that come in and eat your things with 1 power and survive. It also, when it enters, is going to give another keyword, another target creature or vehicle +2/+2 until end of turn. So you can flash it in, crew something. It's something to worry about if opponent's looking kind of playing like rope-a-dope. Oh, they have a vehicle, but they couldn't crew it. They're just leaving. They look like they're wide open, but they do have 4 mana. Why did they not play anything on their turn? They got a handful of cards. Well, it's probably because they have Fang Guardian. Web Strike Elite and Agonosaur Rex are 2 rares, but they do have cycle abilities. The Web Strike Elite can cycle and destroy an artifact or enchantment. Agonosaur Rex can cycle and put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature or vehicle, and give it trample and indestructible. I think most people are going to try not to cycle their Agonosaur Rex and try to play it as an 8/8 trample. So I don't know how often you have to worry about it as a combat trick. On the other hand, it's just there in their hand as a combat trick. If they didn't happen to have a 3-drop or something, they could blow you out in a combat with it, and they might find that that's worth it. And maybe they are in black-green and they want to reanimate. They want it cycled into their graveyard anyway. So that is the combat tricks for the set. Let me know in the comments what you think about the combat tricks. I believe I've been pretty thorough and not missed any, but if I did, leave a comment and let me know. Let's move on now to talking about what cards you should avoid and what cards you should definitely pick for the set. Okay, talking about top commons here. What are my picks for the best commons in draft and probably also in sealed? I've had a really good track record with this, but I'm a human and I'm just evaluating. I'm especially lower on information as I record this particular one for this set than I have been in the past. So anyways, leave your comments where I got it wrong or where I got it right. Come back in a couple weeks, mock me mercilessly for missing or thinking that something was good when it wasn't. Colorless especially is going to be tricky to evaluate. It's probably the top 3 colorless cards are probably going to be 3 of the common dual lands. Whatever the best 3 colors are in the set, that's probably going to be the actual top 3. But I'm not going out on a limb and predicting those just yet. And I think there's also some good things to talk about with these 3 cards in particular. So we'll talk about the colorless commons and we'll talk about more. I'm a little bit more confident in my picks for each color. So, Ether Jacket, this is probably a controversial pick to some of you. It's a 3 mana 2/1 flying vigilance, and we do know there is some X1 removal in the set, so you're going to really get blown out on tempo in the case of your opponent having that. On the other hand, 2/1 flying vigilance that tap sacrifices destroys another target artifact, and it is activate only as a sorcery. Opponent's going to see it coming. But this kind of does everything. I think this works really nicely in a max speed deck. You're going to have a 2/1 flyer that can get in and be dealing damage every turn to build up your speed in a deck that needs to saddle or crew things, to mount or crew things, saddle or crew things. a deck that needs to tap creatures to mount or crew, two is a good number for power. You're going to be able to crew a lot of vehicles, saddle a lot of creatures for 2. The fact that this is vigilance also means you can use the crew or mount ability, although I don't think mounts generally care about defense, but you can use the crew ability on defense. So you can fly in, hit for 2, have this back to crew something on defense. That seems pretty good. And then just the failure mode of being able to blow up your opponent's best vehicle. But there's a lot of artifacts in this set. So being able to 2-tap sacrifice, the sacrifice is somewhat relevant in some things. There's some graveyard recursion. You might be able to replay this. It's not going to be great mana value in terms of your mana spend, but I think it's just great value in terms of your flexibility. There's probably not a deck that can't make some use of this. At least in my evaluation, pretty early on here in the set. I still haven't filled out all the archetypes yet. I will say that I believe the set is 62% artifacts. So that 2-tap sacrifice, destroy another target artifact, that will be blowing up 62% of all cards in the whole set. That's including like instants and sorceries. There's a lot of artifacts in this set. So that's not a joke, and that's something to keep in mind. We know fixing is good for lands. Night Market, because cycling is relevant in some of the archetypes, and also just because it looks like you're going to be able to go 3-color in a number of cases for different decks, I think Night Market should be good. The drawback of these kind of cards is like, okay, well, it's like, it's an Evolving Wilds essentially, but it doesn't thin your deck. But if you have a deck where fixing matters, I think you won't mind playing 1 or 2 Night Markets. The fact that it cycles, so you can just, if you've already fixed your colors and you don't need another land and you can cycle it away, 3 is a lot to cycle, but it's a common. The only drawback I see is the entering tapped. I do think this is going to be a very fast format, maybe even the fastest format that we've seen on Arena in the Arena era. Certainly maybe in the Play Booster era. If I'm right about that, that will be a drawback to Night Market, but there will be some slower decks, and those decks will probably be fine with Night Market. Will it be better than the 2-color gain land tap lands that are already there at common? We'll see. Also, on the removal, the colorless removal tip, there's a Scrap Compactor. Again, just 3-tap, deal 3 damage to target creature. So 4 mana to deal 3. But for 4 mana, hitting, in terms of creatures, you're hitting 65% of creatures in the format. And then it has the other case where you can destroy a creature or vehicle for 6 mana. So 7 total mana. But by the time you probably had a turn where you had 1 free mana to drop this early. And then you can sit around. The threat of activation is pretty real. It is instant speed. I think Scrap Compactor has a chance of not only seeing play, but being good. We'll see about that. But that is my current thinking. But let's talk about commons in the colors. This is what you really want to know. Here's my picks for white. And white was really tricky. I think Ride's End is a no-brainer. The ability to remove almost anything for 2 mana is going to be pretty good. And it's Exile, which is going to be good. There's a Golgari deck that's Graveyard Recursion. The Graveyard is a factor in this format. Collision Course, that's trickier. I'm not sure because of sorcery speed. The deal damage mode also has a lot of fail cases, but it just destroys target artifacts. So the most it can fail is, as I said, artifacts being 62% of the total card file in this set. You're already going to be able to hit a lot for 2 mana. It is sorcery speed, but Collision Course, I think, is going to be something you're looking out for in white. Then the question becomes, okay, what else does white need in this set? I talked about, I think flying is going to be relevant for max speed. I like that Lotsagard Disciple, it can also 2 power for crewing is going to be nice. It is 3 mana, but the fact that it comes down and gives a creature or vehicle lifelink or indestructible is going to be pretty awesome. The lifelink, we know one-shot lifelink effects are always good, if not great, in a set. And so my prediction is that Lotus Guard, did I say lots of guard? Lotus Guard Disciple will be a common that you're going to want. Hopefully, if it's a fast set, you're going to want to get down a creature or vehicle early, drop the Lotus Guard Disciple. You've got a guaranteed get in and get some life, and then you got a 2/2 left around. I think it's going to be decent, but there's a lot of the 3 slot for top common at white, I think, is going to be pretty thick. There's a lot of stuff that is about the same power level. I could be off on Lotus Guard Disciple. I'm not. My confidence on that one is less. On the other hand, blue. I'm very confident bounce off is going to be great. Being able to bounce a creature and then also a vehicle, so it's just strictly better unsummon. And you can bounce your own thing. You can bounce something that they're targeting with a combat trick. You can bounce a blocker in a double block. Bounce off is going to be great. It's if the set is as fast as I think, it's going to get you tempo. That's going to be great. So I love bounce off. Nimble Thopterist. Less confident here. This is probably the number 3 for me. Although this could be a number 1 blue common. It really has the chance because anytime you get 2 rectangles and you're getting a 3/2 here, which is a nice crew ability. It's a decent blocker on the ground, and you're getting the 1/1 Thopter in the air, which can be good for max speed things. It's also an artifact creature token. Nimble Thopterist, 2 rectangles, 4 mana. That is generally good. Will it be good in this set? Is it just too expensive? Is the set going to be so fast that 4 mana is just real expensive? We'll have to see, but I think Nimble Thopterist has a good shot at being a top blue common. And then Trip Up. This effect is usually kind of middling, but the fact that you can cycle it here, and cycling is relevant in blue. There's a lot of things that care about you discarding and drawing. I like that. It's instant speed. It's about as good as it gets. The only thing that would make it better is if it was 3 mana, and they don't seem to ever want to price this at 3 mana. So I guess this is strong enough. I think this is just going to help you on tempo. If the blue decks are fast at all, this is going to be a great tempo thing. And you can also use it in control. I just think Trip Up has a good shot at being a top blue common. Being as it is one of the top blue removal pieces, and you can go back and watch my removal video or go back and watch the removal portion of this video, depending on which version you're watching here. We've got Engine Rat here in black, and I think 1-drops are going to be relevant in this format. This is a 1/1 Death Touch, so it's not only is it relevant in the early game, it's relevant in the late game as Death Touch, and then actually extra relevant because for 6 mana you can deal 2. You can drain your opponent. Well, not drain necessarily, but you can make your opponent lose 2. That also is relevant for max speed. So if you can't attack, if you don't have an attack to get in, and I mean, most of the time people will not block a 1/1 Death Touch. They would rather not trade whatever they have for the 1/1 Death Touch. But let's say you're not attacking with it, and you do have 6 mana. It's the late game, and you need to build up that speed. You've got the Engine Rat, or you just need to deal the last like 4-6 damage, whatever. Engine Rat. Engine Rat is just going to do it all in all phases of the game. It's in terms of drawing a 1-drop off the top deck. This is about as good as you could want, and there are things even that even care about zombies. It's even got some relevance with some rares. So I'm loving Engine Rat. Maybe going out on a limb picking that as a top common, but we'll see. We'll see if I'm borne out in my prediction on that. Grim Bauble, on the other hand, I don't think is going out as far. It's a 1 mana, going to give something -2/-2 until end of turn, and then it's going to stay around. You can either sacrifice it. There are black cards that want you to sacrifice artifacts, or it has a sacrifice ability where you get to surveil. There are lots of black cards that care about you having cards in graveyard, so just being able to put 2 cards in the graveyard for 3 mana. Grim Bauble is, again, just going to do it all in black. I don't think you're ever going to really be mad about drawing the Grim Bauble unless your opponent has all really high toughness creatures, and then it's not going to do a lot, but it can try to surveil you to something that can do something. So it's still not completely irrelevant. Liking Grim Bauble. Then the third pick for black was really tough. I went back and forth. There is the instant speed murder effect. That instant speed destroys a creature or vehicle. On the other hand, is that going to be that good in a form? I have a feeling that Well, we'll see. I think removal is going to be very good because this format's just going to be about aggro, just getting stuff down, dealing damage, racing, winning as fast as you can. My evaluation here, and it is still a little bit early days as I record this portion of the video, but my evaluation is this is going to be a fast set. If that's the case, having a nice combat trick to tangle where you win the combat, you remove the opponent, you're leaving behind extra power with maximum overdrive, I think has a good shot at being a very relevant common. It also has a good shot at not being a very relevant common. It's a high risk pick for me, but I went with maximum overdrive. There's a possibility you just want a good 2-drop that gets in or smacks in, but I do like. There's a 1/3 flyer in black. I think that might be uncommon though. But anyways, let's go on to red. Again, 1-drops. I'm picking 1-drops as being relevant. This is Dynamite Diver. It's a 1/1. Whenever it dies, it's going to be able to deal the damage. So that's going to be a way to guarantee you get your speed increase. You can just attack in with it. Either they block it, it dies, and you deal the damage to your opponent's face and get your speed increase for a turn, or you or it gets in and you get the speed increase and it survives. It also can crew and mount as if its power were 2 greater. So again, relevant in the late game. You can drop this, and as long as you have a mount or vehicle that you want to be able to crew up. 3 is a lot, but this can do it for 3. So like Dynamite Driver, I think it's super flexible. I think getting a creature down on turn 1 is going to be really good and relevant. And your opponent's not necessarily going to want to remove a 1-drop. There's going to be very few ways for them to trade favorably with it, especially since it dies into a damage. Lightning Strike, this is Windmill Slam. This is a good shot of being best common in the whole set. 2 mana instant speed, 3 damage to any target, and that includes going to your opponent's face. And 65% of creatures, not talking about vehicles, but just creatures in the set, die to this. So you're going to be able to remove stuff way up the tempo ladder with Lightning Strike. Also, Crash and Burn, I talked about this in the removal section. It is 4 mana. Usually these kind of effects in red are 5 mana and a sorcery. So this is already good because it's 4 mana and an instant. Unrestricted, destroy target vehicle. So if your opponent has a big threatening vehicle, you can get that for 4 mana. And then otherwise, if it's not a vehicle, if it's just a creature or a planeswalker, 6 damage is going to take out pretty much anything. It's about 97% of the creatures in the set. There's just a few that are bigger than that, but green's big 6/6 gets taken out by this, and that's pretty good to know. But yes, there is an uncommon blue 08 creature that does not die to Crash and Burn in the legendary vanilla cycle. And then finally, green. What are my picks for green? Well, Beast Rider Vanguard, I just like. The moment I read this card, I just added it to this slide. This is a 2/2 for 2, and we know we're going to want to be able to crew things for 2. And then 5 mana, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card. So do you need a land? Do you need a creature? Do you need a vehicle? Like 5 mana, we know these cards are good. Just your opponent is going to have to remove this at some point, or you're just going to sit around and accrue value because any turn where you don't have something to play, you're grabbing the best from your top 3 cards of your library and putting it into your hand. Now, Broken Wings. I talked about this a bit in the removal and combat tricks section. I'm picking this as a main deckable card. It hits in terms of permanents. I don't remember what, you can go back and look at the slide, but it hits a huge amount of non-land permanents in this format. I think that for 3 mana at a common at instant speed, Broken Wings is going to be a good card and even has a chance of being a top common. Run Over almost certainly will be a top common. This is your instant speed punch spell. This is green's kind of premier removal unless Broken Wings ends up being even better. But the ability to have a vehicle that's not even crewed deal damage equal to its power, and we know there are a lot of vehicles with big amounts of power, just makes this that much better than it already, like this effect is already usually a top common in green in any set that it's in, but it's going to cost less for having a vehicle. It's going to deal more damage when you've got mounts or vehicles, or I guess just because you've got vehicles in the set. It's going to be less often blanked because you've got vehicles in the set. I'm liking Run Over for a top common in green. Now, what is left in the video is, in the larger video, if you're continuing on, is to talk about cards that you definitely should not draft and cards that you definitely should, the Windmill Slams. So stick around for that. All right, on we go to my picks for the traps and the constructed plants. Here they are. These are cards I don't recommend drafting if you're trying to win. Now, some of these are actual money cards. We talked about money cards already earlier in the video, but I will follow this up with the cards that I think are bombs, Windmill Slams. Draft them as much as possible. Let's take a look at some of these cards, and I'll talk a little bit about my reasoning of why I don't think you should draft it. First of all, Radiant Lotus. This is a money card, so I mean, if you're in paper, go ahead and snag this, but don't expect it to be good in the deck. I just don't think there's a super amount of support. There's not a lot of things to do with a crap ton of mana and the build around. You can definitely get a ton of artifacts down, but then why do you want to sacrifice them all? There's no good reason where you would want to mass sacrifice and make a bunch of mana. If there was some way to make your opponent have to take damage for the mana or something, that would be one thing. There's a card called Boom Pile, which can, which is that rare, which you can put a bunch of mana into. But even if you get Boom Pile, it's still just a 2-card combo. I don't know. I'll definitely be drafting Radiant Lotus to have for Commander, but I won't be drafting it to try and put in a deck. Similarly, Ancient Vendetta. This is the only uncommon I put on here, but this is one I think is really more of a constructed thing. There is Ketramos there at the end, can use it, but there's really not a ton of use for it. Maybe you can bring it in on the sideboard if there's really something that you know you would spend 4 mana to search your opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for. What I love it for constructed is, like, you know, casting it a bunch and just taking all the lands out of your opponent's deck or something, because you can get up to 4 cards and it doesn't restrict you from taking away lands. But I don't think Ancient Vendetta, it's 4 mana, it does nothing to the board. I don't think it's going to be very playable, so don't go out of your way to draft that. Similarly, Last Ride, really cool, Death Shadow, but in terms of building around, black actually has stuff that gains life. I mean, there are a few things that also deal damage to you, but I just don't think this card is probably as good. I mean, you can play it. It's not unplayable, but I don't think it's as good as you think it maybe is if you're basing it on Death Shadow. I'm just not super high on vehicles to begin with, so I'll let you know that right off the bat. Paying 4 mana and 2 life to draw a card, and then maybe you activate this later in the game. I don't know. Now I'm sort of talking myself into it, but I think it's better in constructed. I think if you go in thinking you have a bomb here with the Last Ride, you're gonna have a bad time. But if you go in thinking you're gonna have some fun with it, by all means. Unstoppable Plan, I don't think there's a ton to do with this in limited. Fun card, especially for Commander. But similar with Repurposing Bay, I did show you how you could use it in the mill deck just to find your mill card. But it is a super build-around-y, hard to make work, you know, birthing pod style, you know, Oswald Fiddlebender style thing. It could definitely have uses in constructed. I haven't seen anybody break it. I know Aspiring Spike is trying to break it for modern, but hasn't yet. So there you go. Repurposing Bay. Just avoid it. Go draft a nice uncommon or common from your pack. And then Ketramo is very exciting for older formats. I just think in limited. So if you're not drafting for value, it's going to be hard to make work. Maybe if you get enough Ancient Vendettas, but then you're paying 4 mana to, like, maybe draw a card. If you can get something out of your opponent's graveyard, with the Ancient Vendetta. It's going to be so hard to turn on. But hey, there you go. Those are cards when I'm trying to win, I'm not going to be focusing too much on. And Ketramos is certainly the type of card that you see in a pack and go, whoa, okay. On the other hand, we have a lot of Windmill Slams. I think there's nothing here that says to me like super busted in the way that, like, you know how some rares can just run away with a format. You've got Sky Sovereign Console Flagship, which you see not very often, but it is one of the special guests, and that's a Windmill Slam. 5 mana, comes down, deals 3 to a creature or planeswalker, and then just sticks around as a crew 3 6/5 flyer, which will close out games very fast. Playable and constructed, so it's also got good value. Aether Spark remains to be seen how good this is. Some people have compared it to the One Ring, which is a bit overblown, but I think in limited, you're just going to basically put this in any deck with creatures, and you're going to, of course, have creatures. So it's a planeswalker equipment, comes down, +1 to attach, and then once it's attached, it's hard for them to remove the loyalty from it, and then you're just getting loyalty whenever you deal combat damage with whatever it's attached to. And that's any kind of combat damage. That could be on defense, it could just, I think it can block, whatever. So that, again, like all these planeswalkers, rich gets richer kind of things. It's once you get it and you get it equipped and you're attacking with it, I guess the good thing is there's a lot of artifact-based removal, so if your opponent plays this, you probably can, there's a good chance you'll have an answer in your deck. And I have advised you to play to main deck artifact removal in this format. Something like 65% of the cards, whatever I said it was, 62% of the cards in the set are artifacts. Spectacular Pile Up is the board wipe of the set. It is 5 mana, not 4 mana, which makes it a little less, but it removes the indestructible clause, which is good against these things like Sabsunin. So, and you can cycle it if you're way ahead and you're not going to need it. Cycle it away and go get some more gas. But we know board wipes are always good and always have a good, decent win rate, at least when they're played correctly. Glory Heath Lynx is my pick for the Mythic Uncommon. I think I spoiled that a bit earlier in the video if you watched earlier parts of the video. But 2/3 lifelink, you don't really need to know much more, but it can also go start getting you planes if you saddle it up, so that's pretty awesome. Possession Engine, anything where you're gaining control of an opponent's creature. Unfortunately, the creature can't attack or block, so it's not super like a 2-for-1, but it is a little bit like a 2-for-1 in that you have a 5/5 vehicle with crew 3 left. Now, you don't want this vehicle to lose in combat because your opponent's going to get their creature back, so there's a little bit of tension there, but I think you'd probably be happy to have a Possession Engine if you're in blue. Is it Windmill Slam territory? Well, no, probably not. But for me, I like it. There's a good chance of being on the higher end of the win rates. Similar with the mill deck, I think people will probably sleep on this, and then people will figure out that this card can be used to mill people out really quickly, and then it'll go back and forth. I think there will be a metagame with Riverchurn Monument, but if you saw earlier in the video where I broke down how I would build the mill deck, you can agree or disagree on that. On the other hand, you have stuff like Speed Demon, which is more of a traditional thing. It's a little bit of a knife's edge to play this card, depending on how much speed you have and how much life you have. There is life gain in black, so if you do draft Speed Demon, if you do Windmill Slam this, pick one, pack one, get some of that black life gain added in, because it will draw you X cards, but also lose you X life, where X is your speed. But a 5/5 flying trample closes out the game pretty fast, so I guess you can't sit behind it necessarily, or maybe you can if your speed is only 1. It's an interesting deck building issue, but I think in general, you're probably always going to run this. You're probably almost always going to be happy when you top deck this later in the game. Chandra Spark Hunter is not the most powerful planeswalker, but it does have the rich get richer planeswalker effect that I dislike. If you manage to play it onto a mostly empty board, you're just slamming 3/2 hasty vehicles and drawing cards by sacrificing them. And yeah, that's probably going to accrue value and win you the game eventually if opponent can't stop it immediately. Gonosaur Rex. This is another no-brainer, an 8/8 trample for 5 mana that can also be a combat trick if you need it to be. So this is a big Windmill Slam, and so is Seb Sunin. Talked about this earlier, but for the purposes of this video, 6/6 reach, trample, indestructible. Can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. But if you Windmill Slam this pick 1 pack 1, there's a number of things in green that can give +1/+1 counters. So you can even, as a combat trick, turn on its ability to attack or block. And it's also going to put counters, it's going to grow and draw cards. So kind of like, what more do you want? It's a 6/6 reach, trample, indestructible that's getting bigger and drawing you cards. And maybe you can't always attack or block with it, but I think it's going to be pretty good regardless. And thank you for everyone who stuck through the whole video, or thank you for those who just jumped to the end and listened to a part of it, because I haven't done one of these set breakdowns for a while. They were pretty popular when I was doing them regularly, but they take a crap ton of work. So it makes it all worth it when you subscribe and you comment and you let me know if it was helpful. And it will be worth it if it was helpful for you. So I hope it is. I hope you will let me know what decks of all these decks that you can build in this format you're excited to build. And I hope you'll come back to the channel and check out when we do some draft and sealed early on in the format. And then we'll also play some standard and some other formats with the new cards, and just generally be having fun with the old Aetherdrift set. That's it for me. This is Manadad, reminding you Magic is a game so fun, even dads can enjoy it. Adios.